system though, as well, or it's just coming through my computer? Keep talking for a second,
Check,
Peter.
check. Yeah. Can you hear me now? Am I coming through the top? No?
Okay, we are coming through the top, so we're good.
Okay.
There. Thank you. How are we doing on streaming? Are we up on YouTube yet? We are up on YouTube. Okay. Apparently we are up on YouTube. So I would like to welcome everybody to this, a special committee of the whole meeting of the Township Council of Muskoka Lakes. I'd like to officially call this meeting to order at the time is 10:04. And I also just want to state to the public that due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the state of emergency in the province of Ontario, we've been given some special powers to be able to hold electronic meetings, which is in accordance with Section 238 of the Municipal Act 231. And so we are holding our meeting electronically today. This is a special committee of the whole meeting to deal with our budget, our 2020 budget. We have also had up online a email address where those members of the public can email questions through, and those questions have been provided to all of council and our staff. We will try and do a best job to answer many of those questions today. For the public who are watching also, we will be circling back on this a week from now with input and direction from council and also the general public. Councillor Edwards, I see your hand is up. Is that a question at this particular time, or do you just have your blue flag raised before I continue on with the meeting? Councillor Edwards, or sorry, not Councillor. So I see your, I'm sorry, Councillor Roberts. I'm looking at. I see your hand is up, or is that just a mistake? Okay. For those people who are watching, we'll clear that hand. Through the Zoom technology, we have the ability for councillors to electronically raise their hand, so to speak, and that's how we know who would like to speak next in the queue. But at this point, I just want to acknowledge the members of council who are present in our committee. Councillor Roberts is here, Councillor Zavitz, Councillor Mazan, Councillor Kelly, Councillor Bridgman, Councillor Edwards, Councillor Jagowitz, Councillor Nishikawa, as well as Councillor Hayes is all here. And Madam Clerk, are you comfortable that we have full quorum of our committee of the whole today?
Yes.
That is great. Thank you very much. We also have a number of Township Muskoka Lakes staff. We have our CAO, Mr. Hammond. We also have our clerk, Cheryl Mortimer, and then we also have our fire chief. And you'll see people's names on the screen for those people who are watching. Their videos, with the exception of our CAO and our clerk, are turned off. When they speak, they would be turning on their videos, and they are also muted at this particular time. There's two other people I know who are on this call, I believe, and that is our district treasurer, and that is Julie Stevens. And then we also have Odelia Callery, if I got that name right. And they have been helped in preparation of today's budget. I'll make a comment shortly. But as we continue on today, I would like to first acknowledge that we are on lands here at the Township office occupied by Indigenous peoples, and Indigenous peoples have cared for this territory for the benefit of future generations, and their stewardship throughout the ages is recognized. So we do need to realize that. I've made a comment about those people who want to provide input regarding our budget, and you can email us at tml2020budget, tml2020budget@muskokalakes.ca as we've worked through today, and then we would be able to answer those questions a week from now going forward. The questions that have come in already have already been circulated to all of council. So committee, I would like to also acknowledge that we do have a supplementary agenda. Came out yesterday afternoon, and it was issued as item 6A. We'll deal with that at the start of the business here. But as we move forward, I'll just ask quickly, are there any declarations of pecuniary interests in today's committee meeting? I am seeing none, Madam Clerk, no declaration of pecuniary interests. So let's move on, if I may, and that is to our first item. And that is that, am I okay to move on to our first item? And that is the supplementary agenda item. Because this really is a new item, and I know District Council passed a similar resolution, I'm going to turn to Councillor Nishikawa, who's the mover of this resolution, and Councillor Roberts. And for those people who are watching who may or may not have downloaded the supplementary agenda, what we are trying to do, I think, in brief, is provide some direction to the province regarding gardening, community gardens in particular for mental health. So Councillor Nishikawa, I'll turn it over to you to introduce this motion, and then we can vote on that appropriately. Councillor Nishikawa.
Thank you. I think it's explanatory, and I just asked for council that will come up.
Okay, I'm not sure if council could hear Councillor Nishikawa's questions. There was a little bit broken up. The seconder, Councillor Roberts, on this particular one, I'm not sure if you want to speak to it again. I'll let you to, and then I can speak to it, I guess. Councillor Roberts, did you want to comment?
Just very briefly, the community gardens are used within the community for mental health or improvement of health, and the social distancing wouldn't be a concern. They use it to grow their food for the coming fall, and lastly, they do contribute to the food bank.
Okay, thank you. So committee, I'll read this resolution. Whereas section 3513 of Township Procedural Bylaw 2019-79 provides that new motions placed on a supplementary agenda shall not be considered or voted upon until the next subsequent meeting, except with the consent of 2/3 of a vote. The first question I'll ask is, those people who would be in favor of putting this on the agenda today? And I'll just do a show of hands. You can actually raise your hand. You don't have to use your blue flag in particular. Madam Clerk, you're comfortable that, including myself, is full committee? Is all in favor?
And Peter Kelly?
Peter Kelly, I saw voted. He did. So, so we can put this on the floor. And the motion specifically reads that now therefore be it resolved that Committee of the Whole hereby consents to the consideration of a vote on a new motion with respect to community gardens as placed on the April 24th, 2020 supplementary agenda. And I will read that specifically, but all of those, again, everyone's in favor of that. So I'm going to carry that, if I may. Sorry, I have one to put it on the agenda. And then the specific resolution is moved again by Councillor Nishikawa, seconded by Councillor Roberts. I'm not going to go through all the whereases specifically here. This was circulated to council. It's on the township website. But basically, the summary is based on what's going on with COVID-19, physical distancing measures, so on and so forth. Sure, we're going to have the clerk put that up on the screen, which would be great. We understand that our medical officer of health for Simcoe Muskoka District Health Unit also supports continuation of continuing gardens. And I think that's a key element in this. We're always trying to follow the directives of, no, it's not. I think you got to open the document. Oh, I'm just seeing that. Okay. So let's go back to our other screen if we can right now. Madam Clerk and just everyone else. I think that now therefore be it resolved, Committee of the Whole recommends to Township Council to request that the province add Province of Ontario add community gardens, garden centers, nurseries as essential services. And further, this resolution be circulated to Ontario Premier Doug Ford, Scott Aitchison, our MP for Muskoka Parry Sound, Norm Miller, MPP for Parry Sound Muskoka, the District Municipality of Muskoka, and all other Muskoka lower tier municipalities. Any questions on this resolution? Again, this is following suit. Our District of Muskoka passed this resolution earlier, so we're supporting that as well. I'll call the question. All those in favor, you can show your hands. There we go. Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. My hand is up. That is carried. Thank you very much. Okay. As we move on, again, I'll go to Councillor Hayes. We've got a thumbs up emoji. There you go. We're figuring out which button to hit. That's great. And the next item of business as we start to move into our budget is a resolution moved by Councillor Bidgman, seconded by Councillor Zavitz. Be it resolved that pursuant to section 232 of Township Procedural Bylaw 2019-79, that the rules of procedure are suspended to enable the 2020 budget introduction. Just allows us a little more latitude. Any questions and comments on that resolution? All those in favor? Again, put your hands up. Everybody, Madam Clerk, you're comfortable? Thank you very much. Okay, so as a little bit of background, if I may, just before we really get into the budget, I just want to provide a little bit of context. Council, I know, knows a lot of this, but also just so that the public understand why we have a budget in front of us today, what's going on, and understand that the work on this budget started back in October under our former treasurer, but due to a variety of circumstances, work on this was delayed. It restarted in February under the direction of our CAO, but with significant help from our district staff, including Commissioner Julie Stevens and Odelia Callery also. So thank you both to the district staff for helping with this regard. At our township level, with new directors in place this year, in fact, many of our departments that have these new directors, our senior staff under the CAO worked harder on this budget, in my opinion, than any other year. Their goal was to ensure appropriate budget based on actual cost relative to 2019 versus prior budget, which in the past number of years, we've done budget to budget. And this year, they really looked at what we spent last year and then put in place an appropriate 2020 budget. The one thing I know that was a priority for each department was to increase our contribution to reserves. As you can see in our 10-year capital forecast, just to update our current infrastructure, we are at a considerable shortfall. In fact, this year's budget to budget numbers put over an additional $1 million into those reserves. I also know that before this budget even started, and when we really got going even in February, there was no real appreciation for COVID-19 and the changing economy that Muskoka, Ontario, Canada, or the world has been facing. This is and has been a moving target for everyone. And I would also like to point out that we've had a number of comments about staffing changes and cuts to budgets that are in many of the urban centers throughout Muskoka and in the GTA. Please understand our township budget, as council certainly knows, we have very few variable or user system infrastructure or financials that come in from user pay systems. So we are very much different in that, and that'll be noted as we work our way through the presentation today. But as we work our way through, I'm going to have our CIO, as I mentioned, do a quick overview, and then we're going to go through department by department, having them present their respective budgets. At the end of that, we can ask questions as required. And let's look at the bottom line for the end of day today. We're going to ask staff potentially if we want some changes to go back to make these additional changes that our committee will direct today. And then we'll be presented with a second version of the budget a week from now on Friday, May the 1st. At that point, we may want to make additional changes, or we can also at that point recommend to town council to adopt the budget at our next scheduled council meeting. For me, in listening to many of you over the past week, since the introduction of budget, the one thing that is clear that during these COVID-19 times, today is probably not the time that we want to put away money for a rainy day. Today, however, is the time to use the money already saved, because it is that rainy day, so to speak. I do also want to thank council going into today. We've had, as we know, many questions already posed of staff. And I know our CAO has done a great job with our district staff in providing answers to many of those questions, which has given us a great starting point as we go forward today. One final comment I'd like to make is a super big thank you, number one, to our CAO and each member of our district team who's helped with this budget. More importantly, probably, that is our entire staff here at the Township of Muskoka Lakes who have worked on this budget. Not only did each and every one of these staff work diligently to provide an appropriate budget based on pre-COVID times, but you also did so working under COVID times. You had to adapt to extremely difficult situations, alternate working conditions, and not only that, for our department heads, you've kept each of your departments open and running effectively and efficiently, balancing your own workloads with your own family life during these times. So from myself, and I know the rest of council, a big thank you for that. At this point, I'm going to turn the meeting over to our CAO, Mr. Hammond, and to do the original budget introductions. Derek, the floor is yours, or YouTube is yours. Over to you.
Thanks, Your Worship, and good morning, members of council.
And I'll let you speak with your volume.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah, you turn. We can hear that.
Okay. Thanks, Your Worship, and again, good morning, members of council. I too would, before I begin my remarks, I too would like to thank the senior management team, along with Julie Stevens, the District Commissioner of Finance and Corporate Services, as well as Odelia Callery, the Manager of Finance and Expenditures. I think the Mayor has captured the sentiment that a lot of hard work has gone into this prior to the advent of COVID and during. And I know that the double duty has taxed some members of the team, and I truly do appreciate their efforts in preparing for today. So thank you. In terms of moving on, next slide, please. If we look at the budget at a glance, the proposed net levy increase is 4.57%. Taking into consideration estimated assessment growth of 1.42% in 2019 and shifted weights in assessments, the effective tax rate for 2020 is proposed to be 3.10% higher than the tax rate in 2019. Next slide, please. There we go. Some municipalities show an impact of the tax rate for Muskoka Lakes. The proposed budget would result in a tax rate of increase of 0.91%. The draft capital budget for 2020 includes expenditures of 5.5 million. Last year was 2.4 million. Roads and bridges projects, as well as fleet acquisitions that were previously approved by council, and you recall that included a grader and a sweeper, represent 52% of that amount, or 2.9 million. The fire capital budget is 1 million and includes 2 fire trucks, and you'll recall that one of those was ordered in 2018, but it was actually received in 2020. In addition, a fire master plan, protective equipment, and self-contained breathing apparatus. Lastly, the parks capital budget is dominated by the replacement of the Portage Street dock, and there are arena capital projects that are proposed at both the Bala and Port Carling arenas. And as it relates to the 10-year capital forecast, due to engineering studies that were completed for arenas, as well as an updated roads needs study, the forecast has been updated to $66 million. The breakdown of the related expenses can be seen in Figure 5 in the Treasurer's report, which is page 14 of the budget document. As I mentioned, in terms of key features of the budget, if we break down the 4.57%, council may recall, so following our infrastructure tour last fall, and the mayor has made mention of this, knowing that we face an infrastructure deficit, the major thrust for the SLT, or the senior leadership team, in creating the 2020 budget was to look at cost savings and redirect them to, as well as increase where appropriate and applicable, contributions to reserves in the operating budget. And so the main factors making up the levy increase include a net reduction of operating expenses. So staff undertook a detailed program review area by area, and that resulted in a reduction of net-based budget operating costs totaling just over $700,000, or a 5.99% decrease in the levy. In terms of capital reserves, staff are recommending that these savings be reinvested in net contributions to capital reserves, which represents an increase to 20.7% of the expenditures in 2020, compared to 15.2% in 2019. In terms of service level changes, the approved 2020 service level changes have increased a net levy by 0.9%, and that was the approved position in finance. The budget maintains the current service levels, and in terms of capital investments, as we progress in the development of our asset management plan, it's anticipated that the capital plan and forecast cost projections will likely increase. However, as the asset management plan software is developed and asset infrastructure condition information is updated into the system, staff will be in a better position to refine the financial estimates and the timing for projects. In terms of fiscal impacts at a glance, With respect to contributions to reserves, as I said, after we completed a comprehensive review of program review, we were able to recommend quite a significant increase in the savings to increase into the contributions to reserves. As a result, the reserve contributions increased from just over 2.2 million to 3.4 million. And that increase will be used to fund the anticipated infrastructure rehabilitation or replacement that's identified in the capital plan / 10-year forecast. It's important to note that there is a net reduction in reserves over the forecast period that will total for 3.4 million. And this is due to the fact that the contributions to reserves are less than the expenditures expected over the 10-year forecast period. It should be noted that the 10-year forecast is heavily reliant on financing from reserves that have been established for a particular project and have been accumulated from contributions from the operating budget and previously the capital budget. Although the asset management plan will enable us to refine those financial estimates as well as the timing for capital projects, given that the township's infrastructure is aging and we're seeing continued reductions in funding from senior levels of government, any increased adjustments to the capital forecast will need to be funded likely by the township. This means that there will be a need to continually increase our contributions to reserves over time to maintain our current level of infrastructure and service levels. In terms of external debt repayments, the township has one existing 20-year debenture that was added in 2007 for construction of the Port Carling streetscape, as well as the Walker's Point Fire Station, which total $1.65 million. That debenture requires an annual payment of $134,000 to the District of Muskoka, and that will be paid off by December of 2027. So if no additional debt is issued over the 10-year forecast period, the external debt will be zero at the end of 2027. Although we currently aren't forecasting any external debt due to the potential reductions in grant programs combined with price escalations and revisions to the asset management plan, that may be something we need to consider in the future. So this slide shows, this is from the beginning of the Treasurer's report, and it shows the impact of the proposed net levy increase on a typical residential owner. It shows the 4.57% as proposed. It shows that the assessment growth being 1.42%, which results in a net impact to the existing taxpayer of 3.10%. So that represents an increase of about just over $19 for a property valued at $500,000. The right portion of the slide shows the major components. Overall, the tax rate will increase by 0.91%. That is, the net levy change is 4.57%, less the year-over-year increase in assessment growth and impact value change, which is 3.66%, and that equals the 0.91%. So, Your Worship, that's a general overview of the budget. And what I'd like to do now is have the department heads go through their respective sections, and then I'll come back and speak with respect to the finance section, and then at the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we'll continue on, I guess. I only get to see certain parts of council here on the little Zoom screen because we've got a thing, but I'll just, at this point, there's nobody who's got their hand up with any urgent questions, so I appreciate it. And we'll continue on. Who's up on deck, first of all? Madam Clerk? Okay, we'll turn it over to the clerk, and you can go from there. Thank you.
Good morning. No, it's not. Can you hear me?
Apparently, yes, we can.
Yes,
Can you?
I can hear. I can
don't
hear.
see myself
I can hear you.
on the screen.
I see you now.
Okay. Good morning. I'm going to start off the senior leadership team presentations. You will note that we have structured each of our presentations to address our respective operating and capital portions of the budget. Now for an overview of the Clerks and Legislative Services area. This includes council, clerks, and the CAO. Although the budget package provides summaries for clerks and council, the following slides combine and cover off these areas. To follow along, my presentation will be addressing pages 23 to 30 of the operating budget and pages 115 of the capital budget. Why is it not going? There we go. Sorry about that. Technical challenge. Okay, so this slide at a glance shows the clerks and legislative services operating budget, which includes clerks and council, is showing an increase of $345,000. I'm just going to round numbers, not get into the $5 and $10. Okay, so anticipated capital expenditures include $76,000. And the proposed contribution to reserves this year is $141,000. So this slide has pie charts that illustrate revenues and expenses. In terms of revenues, user fees include road closing, license agreement, and trailer park applications. Cost recoveries include recoverables being the $35,000 for the building department services, $1,500 for the library services, plus other miscellaneous licenses, etc. The remainder is tax supported. In terms of expenditures, wages include wages and benefits for council, the CAO, and the legislative services department. Employee expenses include mileage, fees, conferences and memberships, education and training, and corporate WSIB. The bulk of goods and services is for legal and insurance expenses. Also included in is departmental phone costs, miscellaneous advertising, survey and consulting fees, township office goods and services, cleaning supplies, office supplies, utilities, etc. Operational expenses include building repairs and maintenance, canteen, and postage. Transfer to reserves include the following capital items: $100,000 towards a future records storage facility, $10,000 for furniture and fixtures, and $6,000 for miscellaneous office requirements that may be required this year. Also included is the annual $25,000 allocation towards the next municipal election to the election reserve. And the next election is 2022. So we apply an annual allocation over a 4-year term to support the election. Turning to page 115, you can see that the capital expenses include Township strategic plan for 2020, furniture and fixtures, and the miscellaneous office renovations that I mentioned above. So that completes my section, and we will move forward now with Corey Moore.
Thank you, Cheryl. Good morning, everyone. Today, I will be reviewing the Communications and Economic Development operating budget, as well as the grants operating budget for this year. I invite you to turn to page 31 of the operating budget for Communications and Economic Development. Next slide, Cheryl. Thank you. So looking at the budget at a glance, we can see that this year for the operating budget, we're showing an increase of $21,700. This department doesn't have a capital budget, and we're seeing a contribution to the net reserves of $20,000. Next slide, Cheryl. Thank you. So overall, the pie charts on the left of this slide illustrate the revenues and expenditures for this budget for this department. We see a revenue of $3,500 for community guide advertising, with the remainder being supported through tax. In expenditures, we see wages and benefits for $97,000, $20,000 provision for reserves. We see operational expenses of $19,500, goods and services of $15,000, and employee expenses of $3,500. The budget drivers for this department that contribute to the difference between 2019 and 2020 include the addition of a line item to assist with the operation of the Fort Carling Community Center kiosk. We see contracted services increased by $3,000 to support video creation in regards to recruiting purposes, as well as budget explanations. And we see an increase in the contribution to reserves of $15,000. So turning over to grants, I invite you to page 48 of the operating budget for the grants summary. So at a glance, for 2020, we see a net levy increase of just over $34,000 for grants. Again, this department doesn't have a capital budget, and we see a proposed contribution to reserves of $13,000. So overall, looking at the grants department, again, I invite you to the pie chart on the left hand of the slide. They illustrate a revenue of $21,500 coming from reserves. In terms of expenditures, we see a provision of reserves of $8,500, operating grants of $119,000, community and festival and event grants of just over $50,000, and attainable housing of $21,500. So looking at this year's budget, the main drivers for the difference between 2019 and 2020, respecting revenue, we see an increase in the transfer from the Affordable Housing Reserve. That's been included to support the request of an application and the development charge rebate for Habitat for Humanity. In expenses, we see an increase of just over $34,000, which can be attributed to additional funding requests that we received for that Habitat for Humanity. Additionally, we've seen a request for electronic doctor patient waitlist in the amount of $2,000, and we've highlighted some cost recovery assistance provided in support of the Bala Cranberry Festival. At this time, that covers communications and economic development and grants. And I will turn it over to Neil to go over development services. Thank you.
Good morning. Today I'll be presenting the development services budget. The development service department includes its functions.
Neil, we're going to need your microphone on. We can't hear you, so. Oh, sorry.
I can hear
Bill.
There we go. Sorry, so we had a technical issue here. Thank you. We're good. Go ahead, Neil.
You hear me?
We're good. My bad.
We can hear you.
I can hear you, Neil.
Okay. Good morning. I'll be introducing the development services budget this morning. The development service departments includes such functions as building permits and inspection program, the septic reinspection program, and bylaw enforcement. My presentation involves page 35 to 38 of the operating budget and page 122 and 123 of the capital budget. The building permit inspection program is solely user fee based and therefore has no net levy impact. Anticipated capital costs expenditures include $40,000. And proposed contribution reserves for this year is $248,000, and $12,000 of that would be towards the bylaw enforcement. The pie chart on the left side of the slide illustrates user fees revenues of $1,410,000, which is more consistent with the actuals of the past few years. In terms of expenditures, there are wages and benefits in the amount of $975,000. Contributions to reserves for the building department would be $236,000 and $12,800 for bylaw enforcement. In terms of the budget driver for our area, it is noted that if projected revenue decrease, they can be covered off by the building permit program reserves. Turn to page 122 and you can see the capital expenditure in 2020 includes the purchase of one new vehicle. As you can see on this change here, the net levy increase for the bylaw is $646, capital, no expenditures, and there'll be $12,800 put into reserves for truck replacement. The pie chart on the left side of the slide illustrates the user fees revenues of $8,800. The bylaw enforcement operating budget is shown to an increase of $646. The proposed contributions to reserves this year is $12,000 towards a truck replacement. Thank you. Next to Treasury.
Okay. So, Your Worship, I'm going to speak to the financial services section, and this portion of the presentation references pages 42 to 54 of the operating budget and page 123 of the capital budget. As we can see, the net levy increase is approximately $103,000, and the reserve contribution for 2020 is proposed to be $355,000. The pie charts obviously illustrate the user fees such as tax certificates and registrations, cost recovery, hydro dam and sundry revenue, as well as interest earned. The projected revenue is based on a conservative estimate of the 2019 actuals. The expenditure pie chart illustrates goods and services expenditures, which include things like consulting, audit-related expenses, tax bill printing, as well as operational expenses, and they include interest and bank charges, tax adjustments. With respect to transfers to reserves, they include the estimated interest revenue earned, and that's directly transferred to reserves. The budget drivers which contribute to the difference between the 2019 and 2020 operating budget include the additional staff member that was approved by council, along with an increase in projected revenue. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Cheryl to speak to you about information technology. Thank you.
Can you hear me now? Okay, perfect. So I'm going to be speaking about information technology. This slide shows that it is included under the Financial Services Department. The operating budget is shown on pages 51 to 54 of your budget document. The capital budget is shown on page 116. At a glance, the IT operating budget is showing an increase of just over $20,000. Anticipated capital expenditures include $235,600, and the proposed contribution to reserves is $264,700. So the revenue pie chart is illustrates that we receive cost recovery from library services. The remainder is tax supported. The expenditure pie chart illustrates goods and services expenditures, which include phone, equipment rental and repairs, insurance, goods and services, consulting, management fees, and annual license fees. The operational expenses include internet costs and council computer allowance. Transfer to reserves includes current and future capital allocations, including the annual data center replacement allocation, the licensing renewals, the IT migration, and a proposed communications tower. Also included is current capital projects for IT-related software and hardware requirements for the township. The budget drivers, which contribute to the difference between the 2019 and 2020 budget, include the library IT services cost recovery increase of $6,100, and in expenditure increases in consulting fees of $95,000 for IT projects, and an annual licensing licensing fees of $60,000. Turning to page 116 of the budget package, you can see that the capital expenses in 2020 include hardware costs of $74,000, software costs of $59,400, and majority of that is for the budgeting software that we're proposing, and $102,000 to complete 2 IT capital projects which commenced in 2019, and they are the M-Files Records Management Project and the Asset Management Project. And back to, I guess, Ryan.
Good morning, through your worship. Good morning, council. I will address the respective operating and capital portions of the 2020 budget in my direct control. This includes the fire department operations and emergency management responsibilities for the municipality. And to follow along, my presentation will be, my presentation will be on pages 54 through 61 of the operating budget and pages 117 in the capital budget. Next slide. At a glance, the fire department operating budget, which includes the emergency management, is showing an increase of $76,389. Anticipated capital expenditures include $1,056,487, a $1.5 million decrease overall in the 10-year capital forecast to $8,776,828 is attributed to the change of a specification of fire truck. And the proposed contribution to reserves this year is $120,000, up from $15,000 last year. Next slide, please. The pie charts on the left side of this slide illustrate the revenues and include user fees such as false alarm charges and burn permits. Cost recovery includes fees from home and vehicle insurance, fire service protection agreements, revenue from medical calls, and prevention charges such as record searches. In terms of expenditures, the budget drivers which contribute to the difference between the 2019 and 2020 operating budget include a savings of $37,590, which has been redirected to the overall contribution to reserves. The further increase of $73,089, which is a shared contribution to reserves from both the fire department and emergency management portion. Turning to page 117 in the capital budget, please note the capital expenditures in 2020 include a master fire plan at $43,000 and a tanker shuttle survey at $6,800. Various equipment replacements to support 119 firefighters, 10 stations, 44 apparatus, the purchase of a fire chief's vehicle for $70,000, a command truck approved in 2018 that arrived this year for $257,000, and a frontline pumping apparatus for Windermere at $380,000. That concludes my portion of the budget. I will now turn it over to the Human Resources and Health and Safety Coordinator, Sarah Lehman.
Thank you, Ryan. For an overview of the Human Resources Department, which includes payroll, you can follow along on pages 62 to 65 of the operating budget. At a glance, the operating budget is showing an increase of $41,400. Next slide. The pie chart illustrates revenues and expenses as you've seen. This is a levy supported budget. In terms of expenditures, wages include wages and benefits for 2 staff. Employee expenses include mileage, fees, conferences and memberships, corporate education and training, and corporate safety. Under corporate education and training, we cover courses in-house for a large amount of staff and dollars for staff development as supported by our tuition reimbursement program. Under corporate health and safety, this money allows us to respond to health and safety representative recommendations, provide a wellness program under the Office Joint Health and Safety Committee work on psychological health and safety, and account for some reoccurring ergonomic needs. Operational expenses include staff recognition and recruitment. Recognition includes the service awards and recognition programs, and recruitment includes primarily advertising for jobs. The budget drivers which contribute to the difference between 2019 and 2020 include wages and benefits, $15,000 in staff recognition, which was reallocated from the council budget, and $5,000 increase for recruitment. Thank you. I'll turn it over to Kathy for the library.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. The Muskoka Lakes Public Library includes the Norma and Miller Alloway Library in Port Carling and the Bala Library located in the Bala Community Center. My presentation includes pages 66 to 70 of the operating budget and page 138 of the capital budget. At a glance, the budget is showing a decrease of 2.1%. Anticipated capital expenditures include $42,500, and the proposed contribution to reserves this year is $50,000. Library revenues include the public library operating grant received from the provincial government, user fees generated through library users. This includes fines, donations, room rental, photocopy services, etc., and the majority of funding through the municipal tax base. Library expenditures include wages and benefits of $330,500, which is the main expense item as the library is service-oriented. Overall, there is a budget decrease of 2.1% in 2020. There is a revenue decrease of $15,000 from 2019, which involves a one-time donation from the Friends of the Library that was used for the new service desk. Contributions to reserves was reduced by $50,000 as capital costs, which include books, e-resources, movies, computers, and office furniture, are approximately $40,000 per year. Turning to page 138, you can see that capital expenses in 2020 include collection, computers, and office furniture. Now I'll turn it over to David for planning services.
Good morning, Your Worship and Council. I'll go over the planning services area 2020 draft budget. To follow along, the operating budget is on pages 71 to 76 of your packages, and the capital budget is on page 121. As you can see at a glance, the net levy for 2020, proposing a decrease of 7.8% or $71,572. We have no capital budget expenditures planned for 2020, and the net reserve contribution for 2020 is a decrease of $5,000. To delve into a little more detail, the pie charts on the left side of the slide illustrate revenues. These include user fees, predominantly consisting of planning applications, being minor variances, rezonings, applications for consent, etc., and municipal record search fees. There's also cost recoveries, which are typically peer reviews and other legal fees recoverable from applicants. And there's also a contribution from reserves of $40,000 planned, slated for the official plan review project. In terms of expenditures, other than wages, the largest contributors continue to be legal and related LPAT expenses, as well as concluding the Minette interim control bylaw process and the official plan review project. The budget drivers, which contribute to the difference between the 2019 and 2020 operating budget, include a projected modest increase in site plan and consent application revenues due to an anticipated updated site plan control bylaw and the official plan review project, as well as several changes to expenditures. These include an increased budget request from the Heritage and Attainable Housing Committee of $17,500, an anticipated lower overall length of LPAT hearings in 2020, resulting in a savings of $60,000, a reduction of $85,000 as the Manette Steering Committee's term has concluded, and an increase for the official plan review project of $20,000 in order to complete the multi-year project. Reserve contributions have also increased by $25,000 to account for future planning projects, mainly the zoning bylaw review and resort policy review. Turning to page 121, you can see that there are no capital expenses in 2020 planned. However, future zoning bylaw and official plan reviews and other large policy review projects are now included in future years of the 10-year capital plan. And with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Becking in Public Works.
Thank you, David. Good morning, Your Worship and members of council. My portion of the presentation will cover the programs under the Public Works umbrella. I've grouped these into three broad program areas: facilities, which includes community centers, health hub, and public buildings such as Township Hall; parks and recreation, which includes arenas, cemeteries, docks and wharves, parks, swimming and trails; and finally transportation, which includes roads, signage, and street lighting. For those wishing to follow along, I'll be speaking directly to pages 76 to 112 of the budget binder as it relates to the operating budget, and pages 124 to 137 and 139 to 146 for the capital budget. Next slide, please. At a glance, the draft budget before you represents a modest decrease in the net levy requirement by 43,300, or roughly 0.755%. The capital program is expected to be $3.967 million for the year. The 10-year capital forecast has gone up, as alluded to by the CAO. It is presently set at about $66 million, of which $53 million represents the public infrastructure needs under the umbrella of Public Works. This is up from about 38 million last year. And the budget entails a net reserve contribution for 2020 of $1,574,700. Next slide, please. With respect to the facilities budget, the proposed net budget for this group is $814,000 for the year, which is a reduction of $23,100 from 2019. Property taxes represent the largest single component of the revenue stream, followed by user fees, which would be revenues from the rental of space in the community centers predominantly, and some small recoveries otherwise. As is going to be a recurring theme throughout my presentation, generally speaking, expenditures were overestimated in previous years, and the approach that has been adopted here is to bring proposed expenditures into line with prior year's experience, and to direct the surplus funds into reserve to fund future years' capital programs. Expenditures before the provisions of reserve for reserve are expected to be $777,500, which represents a $91,500 reduction from the 2019 budgeted amount. Reductions are across all budget categories and bring the budget into line with actual experience. We have made allowances for increased wage costs as a result of collective agreements, and for anticipated costs in equipment and material inputs throughout the year. The bulk of the reductions from the prior year's budget of $60,200 are proposed to be placed into reserves, as I've indicated. The capital budget anticipation for the coming year include building envelope repairs to Town Hall, Milford Bay Community Center, Torrance Community Center, and the Walker's Point Community Center, a furnace replacement for the Glen Orchard Community Center, which is rented out to the food bank, a new generator and internet for the Raymond Community Center, autumn door openers and some minor plumbing modifications to the Torrance Community Center, windows in the Windermere Community Center, and then there is a overall allowance of $2,500 per community center to deal with miscellaneous hall board requests, which are typically small value improvements. Next slide, please. Under the umbrella of Parks and Recreation, the total net budget for the Parks and Recreation operations is expected to be $1,233,100, which is a $9,300 increase over the 2019 budgeted amount. Revenues have been set consistent with the 2019 actual experience, and prior to COVID, this would have seen increased in revenues of roughly about $14,000. The bulk of the increases stem from higher than anticipated user fees as a result of the use of the arenas. Total expenditures are expected to increase by $22,300 over the 2019 year to a total of $1,450,300. Increases in the arenas budget before contributions to reserves will be $16,900, and these are somewhat offset by reductions in the parks area of $29,000. The bulk of the reductions stem from across the board reductions to bring budget into line with actual experience. Provisions for reserve are proposed to increase by approximately $60,200 to $170,200. The increases are in the arenas area of approximately $28,000, parks $21,000, and trails of $8,400. Capital expenditures for the year are proposed to be $921,000 and include $305,100 for arenas, $8,000 for cemeteries, $588,100 for parks, and $20,000 for trails. Major initiatives include dock repairs and replacements totaling $551,000, of which the Portage Street dock replacement was to be the largest single component. As council is aware, council has opted to revisit that expenditure, and so that will not be proceeding this year. The design and contract documents for the replacement of the Port Carling Arena floor are included in this year's capital program, and it's anticipated that that work would go ahead in 2021, subject to council's approval. Provisions for materials to replace the Torrance Barrens boardwalks are also provided at $20,000, and provision has been made for an accessibility mat at the Sunset Park Beach. Next slide, please. In the transportation area, the net expenditures for the year are expected to be $3,649,500, which represents a reduction of $10,900 from 2019. Revenues have been set in keeping with the 2019 actuals prior to COVID. The largest single increase is in the area of cost recovery for maintenance of district roads. This revenue however, will be exactly matched by corresponding expenses. So there is no net effect to the overall department budget. Other increases include aggregate act revenues. We get a small allowance for as a result of the sale of aggregate generated within the municipality, and that is expected to go up by 18,800. Road allowance sales and lease revenues of 75,400. And as council is aware, this is the last year of the lease agreement with SREL with respect to the use of township properties in Bala, and that's expected to be 25,000. Total expenditures before contributions to reserve are proposed to be reduced by 405,700. The reduction can be attributed to bringing budget into line with historical expenditures. So there would be no reduction in level of service from that was completed in 2019. That having been said, there has been, or there is proposed to be a focus on our roadside maintenance and surface maintenance activities in order to try and bring things up to improve things throughout the township. Savings in expenditures in combination with increases in revenues are proposed to be placed into reserve to fund future years' capital programs. As I indicated to council previously, I felt that the roads needs are low. We completed a roads needs update this past year, and as anticipated, the extent of roads needs is increasing, and as a consequence, we're proposing that contributions to reserve will increase by 580,700 to 1,330,700 for the year. The capital program will be dominated by the Beaumaris Bridge Rehabilitation Project, which was tentatively approved by council in the amount of $950,000. Road projects for the year will total $975,000 and will include the reconstruction or resurfacing of Moon River Road, Rossell Lake Road 1, and slurry seal of roads that were previously surface treated. Fleet purchases will total $757,800 and include the purchase of 2 gently used pieces of equipment, the sweeper and the grader, which was previously approved by council. With that, I thank you for your attention, and I'll pass it back to the CAO for some closing remarks.
Mr. CAO, I'll let you comment and then I'll make a comment after you.
Thanks, Your Worship. Council's heard about some of the reductions that staff have made with respect to the operating budget, and although those reductions have been included in the budget, should council wish to go further, staff are recommending that there is potential for further cost savings in the grants program, potentially through the elimination of the Habitat for Humanity standalone grant at $20,000, as well as the electronic doctor patient wait list at $2,000. If both of those requests are removed, the year-over-year increase to the net levy would drop by 0.18% to 4.38%. So now a note on Ontario Regulation 28409. So that was a regulation that was introduced after changes were made by the Public Sector Accounting Board that required financial statement of municipalities to reflect assets within the organization. So the intent of the reg is to allow for the exclusion of things like amortization, post-employment benefits, and solid waste landfill closure. I mean, the latter doesn't apply to us, but the former does. And essentially what it's intended to do is provide council information on balanced budgeting versus full accrual financial statement reporting. So council must adopt the report prior to the approval of the budget. And the reporting on that is included in table 4, the full accrual budget reconciliation table on page 18 of the budget package. You'll see there that amortization is estimated at $3.24 million, and our contributions to reserves are more than this at $3.5 million in 2020. Due to grants from the province, which are funding capital assets, there's a surplus with the full accrual budgeting of approximately $2.7 million. And that, Your Worship, ends our presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll try and just do one quick summary here, and then looking at the time, I may take a brief break. But one thing I do want to say, if I may, I want to compliment staff, and I also need to give a bit of a shout out, if I may, to again at the district, Julie and Odie. Thank you guys both very, very much. Julie, you thought you left Muskoka Lakes 8 years ago. You're back. And but I think for those people who saw our budget last year, for those people who've been sitting around this table for 8 or more years now, through a number of budgets, for the first time, some extremely detailed information, some great summary information, and more interpretation of the budget than ever before. So my hat is off again to district staff and also our CIO. Is there any questions specifically right now, or I'm just actually thinking just for staff and organization that we may just take a quick 10-minute break and then we can get right back into questions? Or is there anybody who has any specific questions before that? I see shaking of heads, we're all good. So I'm going to suggest it is 10 after 11 now. We're going to come back at 20 after 11. And but go refresh your coffees and then we'll get into some specific questions to staff. So thank you all, those people watching. We'll see you at 11:20. Thanks. Okay, I see all of council sitting down and appreciate that. Hopefully everyone's got a refreshed coffee and we'll work our way through. So what I'm going to suggest we do is I'm going to, as councillors want to ask questions again, please use your blue hand flag on the participants panel to raise your hand, and that will alert me that you want to have a question. And I think what we're going to try and do is I'm going to work sort of our way around, not necessarily in order, but if somebody has up to 2 questions initially, we'll let somebody else maybe ask another question, and we'll work our way around that everybody has asked questions, and then we'll do a second round of questions, and hopefully that will answer most people's questions. Again, they are sort of general in nature at this point. Maybe there's some specific questions. I'm going to turn most of the questions, if they're sort of high level general, regarding the overall budget and presentation, to that of Commissioner Stevens at the district. Julie, ready to turn on your computer and microphone? And then I know that, there you go. Hi, Julie. We'll also look to our CIO to answer certain questions appropriately, and or our specific department heads and directors here, if it's a specific question regarding. Any questions from a process perspective right now, anyone? I'm not seeing anything specific. Okay, I will turn the floor over to our committee council and wait for that first raised hand. Who wants to go first as we work our way down the line? We'll see here. Nobody wants to go. Councillor Kelly's opened his microphone, but no, there's his hand. And we will go to Councillor Kelly first of all. And again, if you guys put your hands up now in order, I'll work my way through that list. Councillor Kelly.
Thank you very much. I'm actually just a little slow responding to your request for process questions. At this present round, we're talking questions, not commentary. Is that correct?
I think particularly right now, if I may, I'd like to sort of ask some questions of budget, and we'll go around and then come back to some specific comments as required. And if nobody has any questions, then we can go kind of into comment, but.
All right, well, I'll start with a quick question if I may.
Okay.
And that is I guess the bulk of the work was done on this budget before the events of the last 6 or 8 weeks. And I realize it's early days, but obviously this whole reorganization of our society, social isolation, avoiding each other, distancing is going to have some impact on how we as a township and how our employees work. And I'm curious to know whether we've had a chance to take a look and put any numbers to what kinds of things we may need to do to accommodate social distancing and keep people healthy.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to turn that question, I think, over to our CAO, and he can kind of give a brief overview of to where we're at for that.
So thank you for the.
Derek's mic on? No.
Thank you for the question. So in terms of initial response, in my staff report of April 15th, I outlined some of the adjustments that the senior leadership team have made to respond to COVID. From a staffing perspective, they include temporary receptionist contract ended, arena seasonal staff contract ended early, full-time parks and arena staff moved back to parks early, trail coordinator position role to be filled by parks operators, delayed starts in seasonal positions until at least orders have been lifted. So that affects building administration assistants, septic inspectors, recreational attendant, the swim program. Delayed start of permanent full-time staff, so the bylaw enforcement officer as well as a full-time receptionist. Library part-time staff have been placed on declared emergency leaves. So we continue to monitor the situation. And it's interesting, I understand that there was some comparisons made of Muskoka Lakes to other municipalities with respect to layoffs, and I think the mayor alluded to this earlier. Predominantly the adjustments that you're seeing to municipalities like the town of Huntsville, town of Gravenhurst, etc., are predominantly in their programming areas. So swimming programs, recreational programs, theaters, programming like that requires non-tax revenues to operate. Muskoka Lakes does not have that type of operation. And I think any sort of further operational changes. I appreciate that, you know, there's been some criticism of the fact that the budget doesn't contain a COVID component, if you will. Really, COVID has been foisted, or COVID has occurred, and municipalities have had to react. And I think any adjustments that need to be made to the budget, if it's passed, staff will manage to the budget.
Okay, Councilor Kelly, does that answer your question? We're good? Okay, any other sort of generic questions at that particular point right now?
Barb Bridgman had her hand up.
Oh,
And she did.
Councilor Nishikawa, and so Councilor Nishikawa, and I'm not sure whose microphone that is, it's echoing, but Councilor Nishikawa or anybody, if you can use the raise hand feature on the participants window, if you haven't done it on the bottom of the, excuse me, on the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little button that says participants. If you can open up the participants window, it will open up on your right-hand side. And then there should be a raise hand feature. I see Councilor Bridgman's hands up and Councilor Jagwitz's hand is up. I will go to Councilor Nishikawa specifically right now before you raise your hand, because your hand was up, and then I'll work my way around the room. So Councilor Nishikawa, do you have a question?
Much along the line of Councilor Kelly, when will it be appropriate for our council to start discussing canceling some things, like other municipalities have? For instance, you know, the big one that I recognize involves a lot of staff time is Cranberry Festival, for instance. And when would those conversations be allowed to happen, and how that really relates also to the budget? I have a lot of concerns about the direction that the budget has taken today. Listening, you know, I've certainly been trying to do my homework and recognize that there's a lot of money going to reserves that maybe we shouldn't be looking at this point. So that's why I wanted to know, when is the appropriate time for us to even be discussing lineup plans, if you want to say that.
Okay, so what I heard in there, if I may, was a couple of things. Number one, we want to talk about, and Councilor Nishikawa wants to flag a question around the table about reserves, and should we be putting that away? And I think I actually started the whole conversation today in my preamble that maybe today is not the time. And if that's a suggestion from Councilor Nishikawa, I certainly support that suggestion. This may not be a time that we want to put money into reserves. But what I didn't hear, and maybe it is with the bad internet connection, if Councilor Nishikawa, you were talking about a staffing question specifically, and when would our staff or when is the CAO going to look at staffing adjustments specifically?
No, I never said that at all.
Okay.
I never said that at all. What I had said was, when is this council going to have the opportunity to discuss canceling some programs or some other things that are put in the budget? I wasn't directing this to staff at all. I was directing it to, what is the proper procedure for council to start directing some particular line items that we perhaps may cancel, and also the big discussion of whether we're going to support Cranberry Festival this year.
Okay, so thank you for that. And I think the point of service levels and or canceling programs, what we've heard from our CAO is we are not very much program based. We have like a swim program. We do know that we have revenues that come in from our community centers being opened. And but we are predominantly tax based from a revenue perspective. So we won't see a huge deficiency in revenues. But I think as we work our way through the budget, if a councillor has a question and says, do we want to cancel a swim program? I think ultimately today is an initial discussion for that. And we can move that forward. But I'm not sure if Mr. CAO, if you want to answer any specific questions right now to the councillor, or we'll kind of work our way through this today, because there was certainly a question about going forward with reserves. And I think that might be shared with a number of other councillors around the table. Mr. CIO, do you want to comment?
Thanks, Your Worship. I think the councillor's question was a process-related one, and I believe that what we're looking for today, Your Worship, is some direction from council. If there's things that you want us to look at to assist you with making sort of a final decision, our thought was that we would get some direction today and go away and make necessary adjustments to come back to you next Friday for further discussions or deliberations. And if at the end of our discussions next Friday, you're satisfied with where we've collectively gotten the budget to, then we can forward it to council for adoption following that.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Nishikawa, are you okay right now with that? And then we'll work our way around the table. And I think that coming at it today, we'll have some specific direction on reserve contributions and such. Did you have a follow-up question right now? Are you okay?
I'd like to hear from other councillors.
Okay, thank you. I saw Councillor Bridgman's hand up, but it's now been removed. I think it was there. It's up. She's waving up, down, up, down. There we go. So I'll go to Councillor Bridgman first, and then I'll go to Councillor Jagowitz. Thank you. Barb.
Thank you, Your Worship. It went down because it wasn't a process question.
Okay.
So now we're into actually what the CEO has asked for, I believe.
I think so. Go ahead.
I just want to thank all of the staff too. It was a very professional presentation, and I know there were the hours that must have gone into this. So I am very appreciative of the professional level that this is being given to us at. So I know you asked for 2 comments, Mayor Harding. So I'm just going to start with sort of my overview. I think my feeling is we need to complete an asset management review, which is coming this year, before we start to figure out what we need to put into the reserves. And I agree, this is not the year to up the reserves because of everything that's happened. So that's one of my comments. My second comment is particularly at community halls. And I would like to see, as long as you're asking to come back next week for budget input, I know that the Peninsula Rec Center put in a complete budget in September and asked for more than $2,500. It's a very active center. Particularly this year, it could give a lot more back to residents than maybe other years. I also know Footsbay never responded to me when I asked for budget. So I guess my question is, can we not be specific on particular community halls and what they're asking for? And secondly, I would like to see a complete review of community halls in total before our budgeting process next year to just look at the whole thing. I think we desperately need to do that at this point where there's one center that is very active and another one that is not happening. So okay. Can I get one more point in? Then I may never talk again.
I'm going to circle back to you on the next point.
Okay.
So
all right.
That maybe another councillor asks it. I think I'm going to turn to Director Becking specifically to have a conversation about community centers. And I know there was sort of a placeholder of about $2,500 per community center put in place. But specifically, I know that as Councillor Bridgman has requested or stated that Peninsula Rec Center has some very specific asks of more than that. So Director Becking, maybe you can comment on Peninsula in particular.
Thank you, Your Worship. There are, how to put this, the requests out of community centers fall into 2 broad categories. They are physical changes to the facility themselves. And those are captured in the budget where they're appropriate. There are other requests that, quite frankly, don't meet the threshold of being a capital expenditure. I'm thinking about things like replacement of tables and replacement of chairs and so on and so forth. And it's those latter category of expenditures that I anticipate the $2,500 covering. With respect to the Peninsula Community Centers specifically, the big ask from that community center that I'm aware of is the request for more on-site parking. And frankly, that's physically impossible. There simply is not the land to accommodate that request. So I think the council is going to have to think about, you know, what do we do with the Peninsula Recreation Center? What are the needs and the demands for that in the longer term? And how do we best satisfy those needs? And so I think, to the councillor's point, I think there's probably merit to taking a look at all of the community centers. What are those longer term big ticket item needs, and how can we best satisfy those? And that does not necessarily imply that we're going to do that at each location. It may be that there are other options and alternatives the council may wish to consider. And perhaps setting some task force up with representatives not only from council but also from communities may in fact be the best approach to examining this issue in greater depth.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bridgman, does that answer your question? I think you've probably got a list specifically from, and I'll talk about Peninsula Road. Again, if they're not being addressed specifically, we can raise some of those now. We can send Director Becking back to have a closer look at those. And I think over the next 7 days, we can have some greater dialogue between yourself as a representative of Peninsula and our director. Do you have a supplemental question?
No, that was going to be my suggestion, Your Worship. Let me chat with Director Becking in the next few days.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. Councillor Jagowitz, so I've got you next up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to jump back, if you don't mind, to procedure. And so my question is, we had normally the public is involved in the meeting, and I know a number of the public have submitted representations. And I was just wondering how those are going to fit into today. Will someone read those or summarize those or what? So that's a question of procedure. The second question of procedure is, I don't really have any questions on the budget because I think an excellent job has been done in compiling it and explaining it. But I do have a number of comments on the budget and some recommendations. When is the appropriate time for me to do that?
Thank you. I think right now, what I wanted to try and do was go around the committee table here and make sure that we've asked any specific questions of clarity, and then we can provide some comments and then provide some greater direction, I think, to our staff to go back and potentially do some additional work over the next week. I know that, you know, if we were to take a sweeping and say, take $1 million out of the budget, I'm pretty sure that Commissioner Stevens from the district could quickly calculate what the budget would look like if $1 million came out, or some rough stuff as we work our way through today. So we'll sort of summarize at the end of the day if we have any initial direction, but right now I think it's about questions, and then we'll circle one more time around or twice around again for some comments specifically, Councillor.
So you didn't answer my question on when the public comments will be introduced, but you did answer the second part, that I'll be given an opportunity towards the end to make my comments. That's what I heard you say.
Yes, absolutely. Sorry, and I apologize about the public comments. We've all received comments from the public. Specifically this, because it is a Zoom meeting, it's difficult. We don't have a podium for the public to come up and let us all hear it. So what we have done is circulated that. And I know our staff, because some of the comments even came in, I saw at 9:15 this morning, and we haven't had an opportunity necessarily for our staff to review those. I'll look to our CAO and just sort of as a question, when council would receive some answers to some of those questions. I don't think it would probably be today, but when would we expect some answers to those?
Thanks, Your Worship. I think it would be appropriate that staff sort of assemble a list of the questions and or comments and address those for our next meeting. But we could, if particular members of council, you've received all of the questions, and I'm happy to identify who made the submissions should you wish. But if there was particular questions that were posed in any of those submissions that you would like a response on today, we can try and address that, or we can do it in a more fulsome way for next Friday. I think staff are at council's disposal in that respect.
Okay, I'll hit mute. Okay, Councillor Jaguars, does that solve, again, if there's a specific that we saw something in an email in the last 24 hours from council that is a begging question yourself today or has raised a new one, please raise those questions. And I know our staff will try and answer those. Otherwise, those will be formulated the same as the Q&A document that we all received a couple of days ago now, and would try and answer those as best possible. Okay, you good, Councillor Jaguars?
I'm comfortable with that answer, and I look forward to my opportunity to make my comments. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I see Councillor Roberts is next in the queue. Thank you, Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I support Councillor Jagowitz comments on the input from the public. I want to thank the public. I read them all and they were very informative and very relevant to today's session. And I guess the question I have is that yesterday we received late afternoon from the CAO a very thorough document responding to the questions that councillors had had. And it answered a lot of my questions. So I'm wondering if we should do the same for the public questions, and we should be sharing the answers of both the councillors' questions and the public's questions to the public. Your thoughts?
Interesting concept, and I personally, I don't think I would disagree with that, but I'll look to our CIO to comment that we could post those on the web. Here were some councillor questions and answers, and then also potentially here's the public questions and answers. Derek?
Your worship, I think that perhaps if we do respond by way of a Q&A to the public comments, perhaps those are attachments to our next staff report to you next week.
Okay, Councillor Roberts, you okay with that as an idea right now?
Yeah. Yes, that's good. I'm wondering if the excellent document that the CAO and staff produced and the treasurer, acting treasurers, from yesterday, whether we could circulate that to constituents.
I don't believe that that couldn't necessarily be circulated, our Q&A document specifically. It's not formatted as nice and clean as we may like as a communication piece, but I don't think there's anything that the public couldn't see in there. Mr. CIO?
Thank you, Your Worship. Prior to its circulation, I just want to review it one more time to make sure there's no personal information in it, and that we're okay from that perspective to circulate it. Other than that, I have no issues with it being circulated by members of council. So we'll advise once we've done that review. And again, it would be attached to next week's staff report. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Roberts, you're okay? Great. I see Councillor Hayes has her hand up. Zanelda, over to you.
Yeah, staff indicated that they wanted some direction in 2 of the grant items. Will we be giving them direction on that today for changes for Friday, or are they looking for information next Friday?
I think my perspective would be that today we can provide some of that direction. We can talk about additions, reductions based on the will of committee today, so that staff can go back and make some revisions to the budget, and we can look at what that specifically looks like. So do you have a specific question right now, or I'm going to come to comments where you can talk about a specific item being added or removed from the budget? So is there a specific line item of a question, Councillor Hayes, right now?
I can do it in comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I don't see anyone else with any more questions specifically right now. And I do appreciate it. And I think that's a testament to our CAO and our department heads again for doing an extremely thorough and detailed presentation today, more so than I've ever seen. So greatly appreciated. Thank you. I will now turn the floor back over for comments. And again, I'll ask that you raise your hand specifically. Councillor Zavitz, you are first in queue. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I want to first of all put my glasses on. And and acknowledge that I think staff has done a very credible job here, but I do believe that their instructions for this budget did not and do not reflect where we are now, where I witnessed yesterday the Premier of Ontario tear up, where yesterday on television, and of course this morning it was announced that yesterday was the second most deaths in Ontario. I want to talk about COVID. I have two prepared statements as it relates to COVID and the budget, and I'd like to read the first one now, if I might. And again, it's a prepared piece from myself, and it's titled Uncertain Times. I said, this is the most uncertain of times ever. Lockdown isolation continues. Reports of this fall, recurrence of the virus, the second most deaths in Ontario yesterday. Municipalities are now revisiting their 4-month-old budgets due to revenue shortfalls, coupled with resultant overspending on non-budgeted COVID impacts. What of regional festivals, concerts, rib fests, and the like? Question everything, I think. How does the Key do business for 800 rock and rollers? How does the Cranberry Festival host 20,000 Ontarians? How does SWS play to packed ski show audiences on Rosso and Muskoka this summer? These are uncertain times. Will we see a packed Turtle Jack's deck or 79 boaters enjoying pie pizza at Cleveland's house? Very uncertain times. And then I want to read you what I prepared. And I appreciate this opportunity. So I said there's nothing wrong with this budget, but there's everything wrong with this budget now. The TML 2020 Operating and Capital Budget Forecast document is not at all sensitive to COVID-19 and its impacts on this township and our taxpayers. Given this council has the benefit and luxury most of the other 443 Ontario municipalities did not enjoy, of actually having 2019 spending insights, and further, with the understanding that all of its taxpayers will have been in some form of isolation lifestyle mode for 3 to 4 months of 2020, and that this budget really applies to the following 7 remaining months of 2020 future spending, who knows how the pandemic will unfold and implicate our actions? No one I know has a crystal ball. I refer you to an FCM announcement of May 23rd, yesterday. This pandemic has our communities on the brink of disaster, and we have asked the federal government for $10 billion in aid. Municipal World yesterday as well commented, substantial disruption of COVID-19 is forcing many to rethink all we do. That's uppercase. And AMO continues to lobby intensely for Ontario aid relief. We also know that some municipalities who have long since finalized their 2020 budgets are revisiting them because of COVID dramatic fiscal impacts. Funding is under attack. My ask is for council to request the CAO and Acting Treasurer, Derek Hammond, table a budget sensitive and suited to this time and place we collectively find ourselves in, and based primarily on 2019 actual spending levels, coupled with a zero reserves allocation for 2020 only and devoid of new hiring, salary increases, new vehicles and equipment, replacement of structures, new programs, et al. I am happy to help with this maintain in place fiscal approach, sustaining this township in a maintenance mode for the balance of 2020 while we await provincial mandates and orders and our taxpayers regroup, assess, and adopt their new normal. Truly a unique business as unusual mantra. This is far from over. I also seek an immediate district of municipal Muskoka task force with the 6 municipalities focused on the financing aspects and interplay between us regarding district and education transfer payment timing in a much more fulsome sense than is currently on the table, a 1-year obligation reassessment, if you will. We have no real idea what of the $17 million forecasted revenues will be realized from our constituents during the tenure of this budget. Many who have suffered immeasurable asset losses, livelihoods ruined, and future security impacts in this pandemic. Truly a wait and see moment, a pause, if you will, definitely not reset 2.0. To pass a budget of anything but what is contemplated here would be short-sighted and ignorant of the facts on everyone's mind. Canada, Ontario, Muskoka, and this township will be damaged irreparably if we shirk our responsibility entrusted of us here and now. Fiscal prudence. In unknown, emotionally trying and demanding times, I could not support anything else. We can do the right thing here and now. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Zavitz, thank you. I think there's a lot of information in there for all of committee to digest. From a staffing perspective, I think what we need to do from a council perspective is we are going to, as council and committee right now, be directing staff. If we want to direct staff to potentially stop every road maintenance, stop any activities, which thereby theoretically has an impact on a financial budget for our taxes, I understand that and respect that, but I'm going to look to our committee for that recommendation specifically. I think as the CIO pointed out, our general financial impact from a programming perspective is very, very different than the city of Toronto or Mississauga or Huntsville or Bracebridge or Gravenhurst for that matter. And it is minimal, but I do know that our staff have contemplated that and certainly want to address that going forward. So we can have some sort of general conversation about it. I will say my personal opinion in this, if we stop all work and we potentially lay off all of our staff, we compound, I think, some of this issue that's going on. And, you know, where we talk about essential services and people out there and working, that's a good thing. And those people can continue to work. And I'd look at it where we should continue to work. But that would be my opinion. Councillor Zavitz, specifically, I mean, do you want our staff to come back and cut the budget in half? I'm trying to get an idea of where you want them to go. The one specific I heard is you want zero contribution to reserves. So right now in this budget in round numbers, there's about $3.5 million into reserves. Julie could probably work some specific numbers, but that would mean if we put $0 into reserves today, we would probably be at a negative, I'm going to guess 30, 35%, maybe a negative 40% taxation this year. And, but we potentially might be out of money next year. So do you have a specific number? And I think that's what we really need to send staff away from a stop spending comment. So Councillor Zavitz.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you. Well, two things. Certainly just hearing the discussions about the community centers, and they've been closed for 2 months, and I don't believe they're going to be open in May. So, I mean, I think it's good that we have forward-thinking discussions, but to my mind, forward-thinking is 2021. And I think we as a council need to come together and grasp the severity of where we are. I don't think we're talking about opening up the community centers May 19th and sure, let's fuel that. Let's have people get together and talk about how we can do a better job of that. I hate to say that I'm doom and gloom, and I do want to hear from the other councillors now that I've said what I've said, and that we will have time for that today. But again, my bigger overarching piece here is, you know, to collect reserves and put that in the bank for later when this is the later. If this isn't the most severe thing I'm going to see in my 4 years, I don't know. We had a flood last year in the spring. Now we've got COVID, which is not even, one can't compare it. People are dying and they're getting it and they're passing it around. I don't know how we can deal with this budget in anything else other than a real hard look. And that's all I'm asking. So I would defer to my other councillors if I might.
Okay, good comment. Thank you. And duly noted. I'll go to Councillor Kelly. I see your hand is up. You're next.
Got to top up on the Diet Pepsi first. All right. Well, now that, sorry, thank you very much for this opportunity. And to echo other words, and I was remiss in not saying this, I think it was a terrific presentation. It was a much cleaner and a much easier to digest and understand pitch than I've seen here before. I obviously have some comments. You know me, I generally am optimistic and upbeat, but I'm going to warn you, I'm aiming to have a jump scare at about the 2-minute mark. So watch for that. The other good piece of news, if Councillor Zavitz has just found us a 30 to 35% reduction, then my job's a lot lighter because I was aiming for only a little bit more. I want to just give a little bit of context to this. You know, this is only my second swipe at municipal budgeting, but I have a long history of budgeting at the corporate level. And I think there's a lot of parallels. During the good times, you tend to take liberty. You tend to perhaps back off a little bit on your discipline. You tend to plan for a growth and an optimistic and an upbeat future. During the bad times, you absolutely must do the opposite. You must pare down and cut down and be prepared to weather whatever storm comes your way. If you go back 12 months, we had a budget already approved, but when we approved last year's budget, I'm going to argue that we were in the zenith of all things Muskoka. Unemployment was at an all-time low. Debt, you know, financing was easy to find and cheap. The national debt was low. Property values were spiking and on the increase. We were attracting people from all over. Stock markets were terrific. It really was the best of times. And during that time and in that environment, our total expenses for last year, and I'm not looking at last year's budget, I'm talking about out of pockets, the expenses were $15,871,000. If you flash forward to today, we have a much different scenario. I don't even want to talk about the disease, the COVID that caused this, because quite frankly, I'm more focused on the financial repercussions. Our unemployment rate is a little hard to measure because the shock to our system has only just happened. Arguably, it's just around 10%, but there's a very strong suggestion that it's quickly going to approach 20% and maybe even more. And that's just a number. That's just a number until you think that means that 1 in 5 able-bodied workers will not have a job. 1 in 5 family members will be out of work. I think the stock market has taken a major hit. I can't even begin to keep tabs on where our gross national debt is going to go. It grows immensely, and it was already too high by my suggestion. And generally, that means tax increases have to follow in order to get that under control. It's a little too early to take a real tough number on property values, but I am going to tell you, I firmly believe, and there's good reason to believe, that property values, residential and recreational, are going to take a nosedive in this country. Money is not as readily available. Jobs aren't as plentiful. The zoom and the optimism is gone from the general economy. If you want to look at a parallel, and this is where I think people think I just run around barking at clouds. Take a look at the sort of social history and the situation that set up the Great Depression in the 30s. I can't help but see parallels and see direct comparisons. I think we're in for a very, very challenging time and a very, very long haul. This is not going to happen, or not going to fix itself overnight. This is not going to fix itself over the next year or two. And I frankly think it would be wholly irresponsible for us as leaders in this community to go back to the well and say, we spent $15,871,000 in the good times. We're only going to take a little bit more now that the times have gone really bad. We need to pare and push back. We need to make do. We need to repair. We need to put Band-Aids on things to keep them running. Our focus, I think, needs to be specifically on protecting everything that's valuable to us in Muskoka, the environment, the atmosphere, the culture, looking out for our residents, both permanent and seasonal, and making sure we have a safe environment. Roads are in good enough shape, they're plowed well, and that we're looking after all of the risks that come with being in our society. Anything beyond that is too much icing on the cake. This is not the time. And so while I don't have any direct pushback, I think obviously reducing the reserves to whatever the right number is, I don't know whether it's 0 or whether taking $1.5 million and backing that out, but question every one of our financial decisions, grind every one of our supplier contracts, push back on every one of our negotiations. If it is a capital expenditure and it isn't at risk of falling down and hurting somebody, we can fix it next year. And I know the biggest argument, I've tried to raise this issue with a few people on council, and the pushback always is our constituents expect more. Trust me, our constituents for the most part understand the times that we're in, and they would expect no less of us. It's a tough, tough time to be a leader here because we are going to have to disappoint and make some tough decisions. But if we do it with that as a backdrop, if that is the rationale and the reasoning behind our decisions, I'll make the argument all day long. And you know, more than anything else, I hope I'm wrong. I don't think I'm wrong, but I really hope a year from now, I was the guy just barking at the clouds. But we need to build this budget and govern ourselves and make sure that our township is operated in a way that's consistent with a incredible downturn in the good fortune of people throughout all of this country, not just in the township. And so that's my position. That's my comment. I'll zone out.
Certainly appreciate it and couldn't agree more. I see Councillor Jagowitz's hand is up right now, and I know you've asked one question. I'm just going to quickly ask Councillor Mazan or Councillor Edwards if you wanted to chime in before I do a second loop on this table.
I would like to, and that one of the things I find it hard with my screen is getting that blue hand up, because you got to almost go out of the screen and everything. I think we should just be raising our hand when we want it. That's my and that. But I think we should have a look at the budget again. I think there could be some areas that we could cut and tighten our belts. But just remember, when we borrow money and we're paying $134,000 a year, basically for the 1.6 million that we borrowed. So if we've got to borrow money, it's going to hit the taxpayers further on down the road. But I think we should be looking at limiting what we do put into the reserves. But I don't know if it's zero. I'll let the experts figure that out. But I think just we should have a look at it, because when you look at $19.04 over 500,000, and so that's $38 on a million. That's $3.84 on that. That's hardly a cup of coffee, and that. So you know, yeah, and that we could cut it back some, but we also have to maintain, because you know what the old story was on the ad: pay me now or pay me later. But I think now we should be looking at it and cutting back as tight as we can for this budget. Thank you.
Thank you. And just Councillor Mazan, I'll ask you if you want to speak at all, or okay. Thank you.
Thank you. And without repeating a lot that has been said, I do appreciate all the time and effort that's gone into the budget. It has been a long haul. And I believe that the next version of this budget really needs just to reflect today's current conditions. And as such, I'm very supportive of anything we can be doing to reduce our tax rate through reserves. I think we really need to be looking at that. And, you know, within the operating budget and our capital projects, are there things that are critical today for health and safety reasons, financial reasons? If there's solid rationale that they need to continue on, then I am supportive of that. And I encourage staff to just go back to the drawing board and say, what is it we need to do today? Keeping in mind that we are in a luxurious position, the township, of having the chance to do this budget now. And we are going to be sitting, I think, back at this again in about 6 months, right? If we start doing our budget in the fall, when we will have a lot more information. So I think we need to be able to look ourselves in the mirror, and we have to be able to look each of our constituents and know that we have done everything we possibly can to protect their investment and do our job, which is govern the township. So thank you.
Okay. Great comment. And I'm going to kind of go back around one more time. If I may, I'd like to sort of chime in my perspective and what I've heard and what I also appreciate. I think Councillor Zavitz said it and Councillor Kelly particularly. We are in completely different times. This budget started back at a point where, all things being equal, we were looking at where we were going for next year. And again, I do want to comment and commend staff for bringing in a responsible budget that increased contributions to reserve versus the year prior. So that much I certainly do appreciate. This is different times. We have put some money away into reserves, obviously, to fund our $65 million long-term capital. We don't have enough money, and we're not putting enough money away into reserves if we're only putting $3.5 million a year in. We do know, based on the budget right now, the outflow in capital is $5.5 million. So we'll be out of money really soon. And I do respect the fact that sometimes, this isn't the year to do work, and that we need to tighten down the budget. But I do want to say, as we debate much of this stuff, that if we don't award that dock contract, if we don't award certain other contracts, we are contributing and compounding the negative economy, is what's going on. Those essential services that can work today, they're thankful. They are working. They have a job. So, we could shut everything down, close the township and do whatever, let everybody off, and we could have increased unemployment. And I'm thankful that our staff have been able to find alternate ways of doing business and continuing to maintain. And let's really hope that as this summer comes, that some people are here. And trust me, when the pothole's not filled in the road, we're all going to hear about it. And they will very quickly forget about that this is a COVID year and everything else. So I think we need to directionally help them out and make sure we are going in the right perspective. Councillor Edwards made this comment and about the cost and everything else. So even on a 4.5% increase right now, I think it's $20 or $40 for $1 million assessment going up. But let's also reverse that. If we were to go down and let's do a negative budget of 4.5%, we are saving somebody at the end of the day on $1 million property. We are saving them $40. So when you put that in real numbers, obviously we want to help people. And if I pay $10,000 in tax last year, and we do a 10% reduction this year, at the end of the day, 10% reduction, we're going to $9,000 that they're paying in taxes. So let's just really understand where we're at and what we can or can't do. So I'm going to turn it back to committee. And if you have some specific recommendations, I know that our CIO has put a couple of things on the table, including some contributions right away to Habitat for Humanity. We've got another $2,000 to a doctor. I think some of those items that staff have recommended are some what I'll call easy wins at this particular point. And then we can look at some reserves perspective. Councillor Zavitz, just so you understand, I've had done some math. If we were to zero our reserves, and so we're putting $3.5 million into reserve, just so that council understands, our levy would actually decrease right now almost 25%. So just by not putting $1 into reserves this year, which we can talk about whether we recommend that or not, but we would have a 25% reduction in our taxes this year. I think that's significant, that alone. So I see Councillor Jagowitz's hand is up, and I will turn it back around for another round of questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, this has been some good discussion, and I'm glad that I heard the previous councillors ahead of me, because that has slightly changed what I'm going to say, but not in total, but has made some modification to it. First of all, I'd like to say that I support the great work that the team has done on this. They actually thought about it this time. They took a look and said, let's try to do a good budget. And I support the work they've done. I really do. The one thing I also was very pleased to hear from our Director of Public Works, an acknowledgement that a significant amount of the savings of the 720,000 was really, and I'm seeing how these are expenditures that were overstated in prior years. And those of you that remember the budget discussions last year, that's what I was stating. I also indicated that I don't think we should make those savings and reduce taxes, but we should contribute the savings to reserves so we have the money to do the things we have to do. Come back with that type of a budget, and I think they should be applauded for it. But the one problem, and there's always a but when you say something like that, is that although we're putting 1.1 million more dollars into reserves, at the end of 10 years, our reserves go down by 3.4 million. So in reality, we're not setting aside because money in reserve. Let me explain. The only reason you put money in reserves is because you've got capital projects and you need that money to spend. So we're putting another 1.1 million a year for 10 years in, but are actually going down. And that's because the public works budget last year, the 10-year budget was 20, it's 38 million this year, okay? And that's not something that we as a council can allow to occur without looking at it. However, that's a very detailed discussion. The other thing that in my discussions with staff, they did acknowledge that with the pressures, they spent time on the operating budget. They really didn't have a lot of time to look at the long-term capital budget and the reserves in as much detail as they would like to. And so I would like to give them that opportunity. So what I'm suggesting is that we take some expenditures in the capital budget that are slated for 2020, and this is the year that's important, and we move them to 2021. And I'm suggesting we move the Portage Street dock for 420,000 into 2021, and I believe we're not going to do it this year anyway. And we move the Beaumaris Bridge for 950,000 into 2021, with a caveat. If our Director of Public Works and his professional opinion is that that would cause a safety hazard this year by deferring it 1 year, then we'd have to revisit that. There are also other things that could be moved. For example, there's 85,000 for the Burgess Dam exploration. There's 45,000 for the Bala Falls Bridge exploration. There's 50,000 for the Medora Lakes Road Bridge thing. There's the preliminary work on replacing the ice pad or the things in the Port Carney Arena of 94,000. And then there's one project, which is the rebuilding of the Rosso Lake Road 1 for 206,000. Possibly that could be deferred for a year. What that would do is that would move 1.7 million to a different year. It would also mean that that would also give staff and possibly council or committee an opportunity to take a hard look at those and see whether they're necessary. I also believe that there are a lot of issues in the way we account for our reserve funds. And I think that the staff would also acknowledge those areas need a little bit of work. Another area that we need to work on is we don't get accurate and timely financial reporting. So it's difficult to compare this year with last year, but I'm sure that'll be worked on. I also agree that staff should prepare a COVID plan, but I don't think we have to hold up this budget for it. I believe they can go back after this budget is passed, come up with a plan and come back with a supplementary. Being on the district for a couple of years, they do that all the time. So this is a part that I wasn't going to say, but I will. I've heard a lot of people that would like to not have a tax increase at this time. And you've convinced me. And so what I would like to suggest is that once we move those capital projects a year out, that we then, so far, the numbers are indicating $180,000 surplus in 2019. And I'm suggesting that we take $550,000 of that surplus and move it into the 2020 budget, which will allow the budget to stand as is, put the money in the reserves with the cost cutting, and have a 0% increase. And that, when you do that, that's a difficult thing to do, because you've got to remember that money won't be there next year. So this is just a one-time thing. Now, the other reason that this might work is that if you know MPAC have deferred the reassessment. There was to be a reassessment at the end of that would come into play in 2021, and they've deferred that. So there will be no tax increase, like assessment increase or phase in. So that will help next year when we have to possibly increase the budget if we're out of these times. Another thing that I think we should take a look at, and possibly a wage freeze for a period of time. In other words, just saying, if a lot of people are suffering, maybe it's just time to, whatever contracts haven't been settled, just put a freeze on it at that time. The other thing I'd like to recommend in conjunction with that there be some form of committee, whether it be an advisory committee or whatever, but some form of committee or council involvement to work with staff over the late summer, early fall, to start to assist in possibly this COVID plan, but also setting up the budget for next year. So I hope that, and just another personal note. I've been deeply involved in the budget from the staff point of view entire years, and you wouldn't believe what a muddled mess some of the way things were billed in public works and in parks. And I believe that they have sorted that out. And so I'm hesitant to cut the legs out from under them, okay? So I'm comfortable with the budget, with the reserves, but finding a way to have a 0 increase for this 1 year. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There was a couple of some specific asks in there. One of them is the Portage Street dock. And I think we actually have sort of almost put that on hold a little bit. And then also the Beaumaris Bridge. I'll turn to Director Becking to speak specifically to sort of those two items. And what can be deferred. And I also, again, I'm going to make the comment to council that I think when we can keep some people employed, we are helping the economy where we can. The more projects that we cancel, the more we compound the negative recession and economy. So I'll leave that right now. Director Becking, regarding those two items.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to the members of council. With respect to the Portage Street dock, you have rejected the bids. So there is no contractual obligations on the part of the corporation to proceed with that project. I think as Councillor Jaglowitz alluded to, there is presently in the document before you $420,000 allocated for that project. So by not proceeding with that project, which is a decision that you've already made, there's an immediate savings of the value of that project. And that is a very easy win for council immediately. With respect to the Beaumaris Bridge, I would counsel caution to you. Will the bridge fall down tomorrow if that project does not go ahead? And the answer to the question is no. But that bridge is 50 years old, 52 to be precise. If it is properly looked after, and if it is, if the things that are wrong with it are corrected in a timely way, you'll probably get 100 years out of that bridge. However, if you don't look after it properly, you'll only get maybe 70 or 75 years. The analogy I can give you is your own homes. You have to replace the shingles every 15 years or so, roughly speaking. If you get to 15 years and you decide to take a chance and you guess right, then you've staved off the need for that repair for a period of time. If, however, you guess wrong, then not only do you have to replace the roof, but you're also going to have to replace the insulation that gets ruined and the drywall that gets ruined because the roof leaked. The same principle applies in bridges. You need to put the right dollars into the right treatment at the right time in order to minimize your overall life cycle cost. And that's a fundamentally different approach than what most municipalities do, which is you build it and you forget about it until it falls down and then you rebuild it again. The latter alternative or the latter approach to dealing with your infrastructure is the far more expensive approach in the longer term. So while I respect that council may wish to defer the project for 1 year, I'm cautioning you that it's a damn slippery slope. And we do have a contract in place. It's actually come in well below budget. To, I think, the mayor's comments, it will help to support the economy. The work can go ahead respecting physical distancing and all the rest of the recommendations of the health community with respect to making sure that we don't propagate the virus any more than is absolutely essential. So with that, your worship, those are my comments. I'll take whatever direction council wishes me to take.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got in order right now, Councillor Kelly, Councillor Zavitz, and then I go to Councillor Edwards. So Councillor Kelly first.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm clearly not going to repeat what I already said, but I want to address a few things. Number one, I wish in the world of municipal finance, reducing expenses and reducing taxes wasn't called a negative budget, because quite frankly, that's the opposite to how I think it looks or should be. Number two, I can't tell you how many times I've heard, but it's only $40 on this and it only costs you 10 cents more on that. I don't like that approach. We need to be leaders here, and leaders don't overlook this because it's only $40 more a month. It can only cost what it needs to cost. And a penny more than it needs to cost is a penny too much. I also, and I realize there's a philosophical sort of difference. I understand that by cutting projects, perhaps we're taking work away from somebody who is otherwise needing employment. We shouldn't be in the business of making work. We're here to run this place to the best of our abilities with the resources that are available to us. I understand that there's a contractor somewhere who wants to rebuild that bridge, but if we go ahead with it and it's not completely unnecessary, all we're really doing is transferring the cost of keeping that person employed back to our taxpayers. And I'm going to tell you, a year from now, 6 months from now, all of our taxpayers, whether they are the enviables or whether they are the people we do business with every day and from a local perspective, they are going to be feeling very negative repercussion. This is going to hit everybody. And God, I hope I'm wrong, but I don't believe I'm wrong. This is going to be a devastating blow that's going to take us a long, long time to recover from. We have to start now. Councillor Zavitz said we have the benefit of at least a little bit of a window into what's going on. Let's look through the window and see what's coming and make sure that we react to it. I think comparing the dollars spent to the dollars proposed to be spent, the dollars that were spent last year in the best of times against the dollars that we're approving for expenditure in what arguably and with hindsight will be the worst of times, although we won't recognize it maybe for a year or two, is the only prudent way to lead the part of this township's operation that we have some control over. We have control over this and we need to take full advantage of it. I understand the immediate value of not contributing to or contributing to reserves. I must admit the whole concept of reserves, which seems somewhat arbitrary, seems somewhat unregulated, kind of smacks a little of a sandbagging technique. And I will be honest with you, the fact that we can say, let's not put money in the reserves kind of confirms that it's a sandbagging technique. Let's focus on the operating expenditure. Let's grind. There's no $1 million win here. It's a bunch of $50 wins. Let's find it and grind it out of the system and stop paying it. And I'm out.
Okay, thank you for that. Just a couple quick comments, and I appreciate the contribution to reserves is a bit of a sandbagging idea. The idea that we put money away, and for those people who haven't sat around the council table for many years, the simple concept is we continue to fund a relatively even level, because this year we may spend 5.5 million in capital. Next year we spend 3.2 million. The next year we spend 5.5 to level the tax base. Otherwise, this year we're going to pay $12 million in taxes. Next year we only have to pay $8 million in taxes. The next year we have to pay $16 million in taxes. So the idea is that we level it, and that's the idea behind contribution to reserves. I just want to turn a question over to Commissioner Stevens, and she's been following along to this. One of the ideas, and I just want so council to understand, is my understanding. So we've heard a question about deferring the dock, let me say, as a capital project on Portage Street. At the end of the day, Commissioner, maybe you can help council understand that really doesn't have an impact on today's levy. And even if we defer that a year, that money still is coming out of our current reserves or the capital budget. Maybe Julie, you can help explain how that works specifically, and that we wouldn't really see a financial savings today. Julie?
Sure. Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. So the concept is exactly what the mayor was just talking about, which is that capital can go up and down each year, and you're looking for sort of a level contribution in, so that the levies don't spike from year to year. And so deferring capital. So what we've done from a staff perspective here is taken a look at that 10-year capital, and we're trying to take a measured approach to increasing the reserves, and then your asset management plan will get a little bit better, and we can continue to do that into the future so that you get to a place where you're not so reliant on provincial grants, quite frankly, that might not be there in the future. And so taking out a capital project this year and just deferring it for 1 year, it's still within the 10-year capital, and so it's still going to have to be paid for at some point. And so it wouldn't, again, council can make the decision this year to make a cut to their contributions to reserves, but you will be in a financial difficulty a few years from now, and more so than you already are, because your plan is to spend quite a bit into the future due to the aging infrastructure. So that is why the 420, if you really want to take another 420, you have to reduce it from your reserves in the current year, and it's just an impact into the future. It's not about cutting a capital item and then that impacts your reserves or your levy. We've tried to build this budget that the operations are what are impacting the levy strictly.
Okay, thank you for that, Julie. So council, again, if you understand that, even if we didn't do the bridge, so it's $420,000, our levy, save and accept reserves, doesn't change. The operating budget doesn't change, and we're still going to be having to charge X dollars. So really the contribution to reserves is what we're looking at, versus what work is actually done. So I just want to make sure that people understand that. I had Councillor Edwards first, I think, and then I'm going to go to Councillor Roberts. Oh, sorry, Councillor Zavitz. Sorry, your flag got cleared. Sorry, I'll go to Councillor Edwards, then go to Councillor Zavitz, then Roberts. How's that?
Okay, thank you very much. I do agree with Mr. Becking. We should be doing that bridge now. We have pushed it off for a few years to begin with. And maybe Ms. Stevens could say, what's it cost over 20 years to borrow $1 million in interest, because that's what's going to happen if we run our reserves down. We're going to have to borrow, and it's going to cost us more. We're paying $134,000 a year now for, I think it was a $1.6 million loan, which over 20 years, it probably is costing us over $1 million in interest. And that's so, you know, we got to be careful, because I remember the years when everybody in the new council 8 years ago, we're trying to go for zero budgets and everything else like that. And we looked like heroes until we had to put 7 or 8% on. Everybody said, well, what are you doing that for? Because if you know you're to budget 3 or 4% every year, it averages out. And that's so it's a word of caution. If council want to take a look at putting zero in, that's fine, but it's going to catch you in the end.
Right. So thank you for that, Councillor Edwards. I think there was a specific question there to Julie. I think from also some background perspective, a number of years ago, as we heard, we did issue a debenture at the township that was through the district. But I think the point of reference, that debenture when it was issued was probably at a significantly different interest rate than where we are at today, where we know we're at probably the best interest rates in most of our lifetime. And maybe Julie, highlight the difference if you can from what that debenture may have been offered at and where we may be at today if we did have to do a debenture. I think the other thing, just so that council, and I don't think there's an individual around the table, and I know it certainly is for myself, that everyone's, unless you're in a, depending on how your income is, our income levels on a monthly basis have gone down, and many people are having to dip into their own personal reserves to pay their monthly bills today, and we're going to have to replenish those monthly reserves. I know that's about myself, and I know many people around this table, and I know that many people who have emailed and sent in questions are certainly in a negative cash flow situation using reserves to maintain. No, they're not out buying the new boat. They're not out doing the renovation, but they are maintaining what they have. And I think that's my mindset from this budget going forward. Julie, have you got some numbers yet? Have I talked long enough?
Thank you. I appreciate that. So the bylaw from 2007 had an interest rate of 5.233%, which was what the rates were, the indicative rates at the time. And I was just trying to pull up as what the rates are presently that the district has, and they are much lower right now. I'm trying to see if I can find it, but it was, I think, in the range of the in the 10-year range, it was in the 2% mark, but let me keep trying to find it in my emails from National Bank just to see what those are. And as far as the, so my opinion on debt is that you don't need to be afraid of debt. So debt, when you're looking at long-lived assets, so assets that are in the 20, 30, 40-year mark, it makes a ton of sense to go to the market and get some debt for that, so that not only are the current people who are enjoying that asset paying for it, but the people in the future are also paying for it. And so I think as part of your asset management plan, when you get to be a little bit more sophisticated in it, and the new treasurer will be coming back to council to look at financing measures. So what does council feel comfortable with as far as a debt hold look like? So I was, after this, I will try and come up with some numbers to give you a sense of where the Muskoka Lakes debt is compared to other municipalities, both its size and not its size, to see where it ranks. My sense is that it's a fairly low, you've got fairly low debt at this point, but I don't think your reserves are quite in comparison to other municipalities. So, but I'll try and do some of that benchmarking for next Friday so that you can see where you are as a municipality. But I agree that the debt will be far cheaper at this point, but council has to be willing to want to pay for it regardless.
Right. So and I do appreciate that. And I think it is noted that, well, even at 5.2 to 2%, we are certainly even one half the cost And as rates continue to drop and as they potentially try to stimulate an economy going forward, I think now more than any might be a time to borrow some money to look at our long term, but we'll park that whole discussion. I have Councillor Zavitz, so just where I'm going to go in order here: Councillor Zavitz, Councillor Roberts, Councillor Hayes first, and then Jaglowitz, just because I hadn't heard from Councillor Hayes in this round yet. Okay, Councillor Zavitz.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I want to speak to a couple of things. First of all, the idea that the Beaumaris Bridge is a 100-year bridge, I want to make sure I understood that correctly, and it's at half of its useful life. So we've got a 50-year bridge. If we don't fix it right now, it'll be a 75-year bridge. So what I'm talking about, what I've been very adamant about here is this is 2020. I'm only talking about this year. What I do know about my own finances is that if I don't buy something, then I save the money that I didn't use to buy that something that I decided not to buy. So a lot of the logic about savings, and actually what I'm hearing, borrowing for reserves, that gives me a shudder, because I mean, I can't imagine why I would be borrowing for a rainy day when all of the assets that we have as a township, you know, I'm suggesting in my platform that we simply go to a maintenance mode. Nothing that we have would be degraded. It would, you know, do we need to put a new roof on? And of course, I have done some analysis. I didn't realize we were going to go into that. So, you know, so distinctly, if you will, because contrary to what Councillor Jaglowitz has said, you know, I don't believe it's a matter of cutting the legs out from under our staff. I appreciate our staff, and I've gone out of my way, both as a councillor and as the chair of General and Finance, to embrace them, and they know that I care. I just think that this might not be a great time to spend $100,000 on a consultant, an IT consultant, you know, in the year 2020. That's all. So I mean, I've gone through this, but everybody else has gone through it too. There's a minimum $800,000 in operating, and there's a couple of million. I mean, I'm happy to put that on the table. I'll email it to whoever wants it. I think everybody has done the same kind of math, though. I mean, we're talking about the same bridges, the same docks. I mean, the same roofs, the same floors. I think we should be more immediately talking about a right here, right now budget, not, you know, talking about reserves and this is a great time to borrow. I don't know, what would we be borrowing for? In fact, we're advocating saving. So I don't understand what the borrowing piece is. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. And I just want to provide some clarity again, and I'll ask the Commissioner to correct me if I'm wrong. But if we were to defer the Beaumaris Bridge at $800,000, $900,000, if we were to defer the dock at Portage Street, if we were to defer many of these capital projects, it still wouldn't change theoretically the amount that we levy and that we are going to spend this year. All it's going to do, and our effect is to change that, we either reduce our operational budget or we reduce the amount to reserves. But just by saying we're not going to do this project this year, there's no operational savings that we would reflect in the budget. Commissioner?
Okay, I'll try and be clearer this time. So if you decided to defer those capital projects, we would amend the capital budget as it's been presented. But what is driving the levy is the operating budget and the contributions to reserves. So you would need to make changes to the contributions to reserves in order to make the levy impact that you're asking for.
Okay, so Councillor Zavitz, do we understand again? So we can defer these items, but they don't change how much tax our taxpayers have to pay today. That's the fundamental difference. What we can affect is how much money we put into reserves today. That's a guarantee. And that, I think we all are discussing that, you know, literally if we put $0 into reserves, we can still do every capital project we want to do today. And if we put $0 into reserves, in round numbers, we're going at 25% reduction in our taxes that we charge people. But we're just ending up in a bigger hole that we're going to have to fill later on. So that's the fundamental we need to understand when we defer projects that are coming out of capital, not out of operating.
Understood. If I might, thank you. Your Worship, if I might. I certainly understand, and Julie, thank you very much for that information and that insight. Again, I want to reinforce the idea that this is a right here, right now budget. I think that's what I'm imploring budget to, to council to agree with me on, that the fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, if we don't spend the money, we have the money. If we just don't spend it, we just don't see, I don't know how we would need to spend $100,000 on a consultant for IT in 2020 when everything's closed and the only people working in the township are the people inside the building, right? I don't know why we would need to spend. So however that impacts, it's $100,000 we aren't going to spend now. I would suggest we'd spend it in 2021. And I think that I'd be happy to pass through a whole bunch of information here, but do we need a pumper truck back to Capital for Windermere for $380,000? I mean, I'm just simply saying, why wouldn't we pause all of that thinking that just sort of celebrates where we are right now, and not trying to be a hero here. Just let's be smart about this. That's my point.
Okay. So again, appreciated. But ultimately, I think what we are trying to do, and just if I can help council understand this, because we seem to be missing a little bit, whether we take money out of reserves today or not, doesn't affect how much we're charging our taxpayers today. What we are doing is deferring potentially, and what we should be doing is deferring the amount of money we put away, and we put away into our savings. So I'm going to go to Councillor Roberts next, Councillor Hayes, and then Councillor Jaglowitz, then Bridgman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too would like to praise the Commissioner of Finance for the district and our staff and CAO for the fantastic job they've done on the budget. It's very clear this year. What I want to say is two things, is that we need, as it pertains to putting money into the reserve, as it pertains to our operating expenses, we must do what is necessary, and underline the word necessary, to reduce the tax burden on our elected, on our constituents and property owners. The other point I have is that I would ask that we take a look at our estimated revenue for this year, because I think that we are going to fall short of that revenue projection based on what we're seeing in the, people not having the income. So I think our revenue is going to go down, which could impact our budget. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Hayes first. Councillor Hayes. I'm not sure. I think your phone is still muted, Councillor Hayes. Either we'll undo it or there we go.
All right. I'd just like to say, this is a meat and potatoes budget. There's not a lot of gravy on it. And if you're going to be respectful of the councillors, respectful of the taxpayers, you cut the gravy, you don't cut the meat and potatoes. Because if you cut the meat and potatoes, it's going to come back and bite you in the end, and you're going to end up paying more money for it. I was on council when we had zero budget increases or zero tax levy increases, and the next year people were really not happy. I think if somebody can't afford something during this time, I think we're going to be understanding, and this is the time that we will look into things, that other things. But right now, if it's going into the reserves, then you have to pay for it if you're going to use it in the future. Saying something you're not going to do it this year, but you do it next year, does not change what you have to save in order to do that. The only way you cannot do it is to just take it right out of the budget. And I don't think there's anything in the capital that we can take out of the budget completely. So we should look at the few things that we have that are gravy, like that were pointed out by the senior team, and see what we can do about getting rid of them. And that's what I would do.
Okay, thank you for that. I have next Councillor Jaglowitz. And Councillor Roberts, I'll get you to clear your hand if I can. Thank you. Councillor Jaglowitz, and Councillor Hayes the same.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to clarify something that both yourself and the commissioner have explained very adequately, that changing the capital budget does not affect the current year's operation. And I never said it did. I understand that concept fully. What I said about the operating budget was that I thought that the staff did an excellent job on it, and I support it. But I also recognize the comments of other councillors that maybe this is not the time to have a tax increase. Maybe it's the wrong message. So therefore, I suggest that since we're looking at a possible $880,000 surplus from last year, which we won't have again because they've corrected the errors that were in the budget, we could take $550,000 of that and put it into this year's budget, which would keep the contribution to reserves the way they are, and it would not have a tax increase. I agree that's a dangerous thing, and you don't want to do that often, but maybe, as other councillors have said, maybe this is the year to do it. Okay, so secondly, the reason I brought up the capital budget was because this is the first time we've seen this budget that has a $13 million increase in public works. And we don't have time right now to look at that in detail over the 10 years. And I added up, there's 6 projects: the Morris Dam, Bala Falls Bridge, the Burgess Dam, the Morris Bridge, the Milford Bay Road, Port Carling Arena Floor, and the Bala Arena Floor. That's 8.7 million. And I think we need to have a discussion on that and see how we deal with that. And therefore, I was asking that the 1 million for the Morris Bridge be deferred so we could be part of that discussion. Because we may all agree that spending 2.4 million on the Burgess Dam is much more important than the Morris Bridge, but we haven't had that conversation. And that's all. So there were 2 distinct thoughts there. Because what concerned me with this budget is we're putting 1.1 million into the reserves, but it doesn't increase them, okay? And therefore, I just wanted to make that position clear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Jagowitz. And I think duly noted that, in the planned capital this year is 5.5 million. And if we're only putting 3.5 million in, we're down $2 million. That's a given. We're underfunding reserves. I'll go to Councillor Bridgman next.
Thank you, Your Worship. I want to stay sort of at a higher level, but let you know what I'm thinking. So I agree this is an unusual year. I would support no tax increase. And I believe we need to take it out of our contributions to reserves and anything else that the CAO and his team may see that we can have further savings on. But I think I don't want to see a reduction because I understand the reserves and I don't want to get into that I don't want to set us up for real problems down the road. So that's just my comment.
Okay, thank you. And I see Councillor Kelly.
Thank you very much. Last thought, just following up on something that Councillor Roberts said, which I got so excited about expenses, I forgot to talk about my concerns on the revenue side. Non-tax revenues, to the extent that they're dependent upon things like fees for building permits and so forth. I think we need to really dig into the assumptions that underlie that, because my belief is that we're going to see a major decline in that kind of activity over the next couple of years. Money is tight, unavailable, unemployment, all those good reasons. I think we just need to go back and challenge ourselves as to whether or not the rate was it $3 million in non-tax revenue last year, whether that's sustainable over the next couple of years. Thanks.
Okay. Greatly appreciated. So we've gone around a couple times here, and I just want to try and hopefully get some direction here. Our day is moving on. And I'm going to just ask some specific questions so we can potentially let staff go back and provide us some ideas. Also, in discussions with many of you, there's been a few items that we have talked about, and I'll just kind of get a nodding of heads or a shaking of heads right now. But staff have identified 2 specific things in their budgets right now, one of them being habitat. and the other one being $2,000 to a doctor or a new dental or medical health suggestion. Is there anyone, let me ask it this way, is there anyone who is really wants to keep those two items in the budget, or would we like to see what those may look like out of the budget going forward? Is there anyone who wants to put their hand up and say, yes, I want them in, or are we all in general occurrence that those two can come out? Councillor Zavitz wanted to comment.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I'm not talking about $22,000. I really am not. I can't even believe we're doing this. I'm not, and out of total respect to everyone, I guess I'll just shut up, because this is not about $2,000 and $20,000. This is about $100,000 for IT consultants, and this is about just how we conduct our business right here, right now. So, you know, I don't want to beat it up, but I think that for us to be looking at what, I don't hear anybody talking about the $32,000 that the council voted for themselves for the increased benefits, and we voted the mayor $5,000 as a raise. So I'm not hearing, is that the next thing you're going to bring up? So I'd rather give you a list, if I might. If that's what we're talking about, I'd rather give you a list.
Well, so actually, if you may, it's funny, that's on my list of discussion items that I wanted to try and work through that I've had. So let me go through what I have, see where else we want to go on. And again, I have some ideas to where we may be able to send staff to be able to come back again in a week, if I may. Okay. So number one, and again, I'm not trying to look at a 2,000 here or there. I was leaving some bigger items to last, but staff have immediately offered up today a $22,000 perspective. And my question right now is, that's staff's comments. So is there anybody who disagrees with those coming out of an operating budget right now? Trust me, it's going to go deeper. Councillor Zavitz.
Thank you, Mayor. And again, the Habitat for Humanity $20,000 that we're contemplating is a much bigger piece. Am I wrong? The District of Muskoka, if I'm correct in this, as I understood it at the meeting, if, you know, we all need to show that we're participating. So we put in 20, the district's going to put in 100 and some odd thousand, and this is a $400,000 project. So I would not be in favor of not giving $20,000 to a $400,000 project where it's funded from outside, and we can actually provide homes for two families in Bella.
Okay, Councillor Hayes, you want to chime in on that?
The money that was put aside by district was for the building of a rental unit, and the council decided that they did not want a rental, they wanted an ownership unit. So at this point in time, there is no money on the table from district, as far as I know. They would have to apply for it. There is money available there, but there has been nothing in district put aside for this particular build.
So what I'm hearing from Councillor Hayes is that the 20,000 is kind of a moot point, and we're not going to spend it anyway, so it can probably come out of this budget. Fair? That's a nodded yes. Okay, so I'm getting concurrence around the table. Mr. CAO.
Thanks, Your Worship. I just wanted to be clear to council that there was a request for a rebate for application fees as well as development charges pursuant to our affordable housing program. Staff are proposing to keep that in the budget. This was an additional request for an additional 20,000.
Okay, thank you for that. The second component, again, that staff offered up was, again, the $2,000 for the doctor or the online thing. Does anybody look forward to helping all the others specifically? No? So we're okay. I think direction to staff to remove that. The other thing, and Councillor Zavitz brought it up, what Council had approved a couple months ago, but prior to COVID-19, was a council, we were going to up everybody's benefits to be more on par with our peers, if you will, around the District of Muskoka, and our health spending account in particular. And then we were also trying to make sure that all of our salaries were equal to everyone else. And I have heard, and I would agree 100%, that I think we need to defer that in particular. If anybody has a disagreement that as a councillor, we should not be deferring the increases to our health spending account, even though it only brings us to par with others, please speak now. Otherwise, I'm going to request. Councillor Jagowitz, you have a comment?
Yes, I prefer it not be deferred, but that it be canceled.
We can go back and I think review that. We have made a recommendation to be in this budget. We're going to take it out of this budget, and at budget time next year, we can look at whether or not we want to put it in or not. I don't think it changes the existing resolution. There was a report and council made a recommendation, but we're choosing not to implement that recommendation at this particular time. So I think that's appropriate. Anyone else on that right now? Okay. Everybody's okay with that? Nodding of heads for the clerk to see. We're going to remove that. So the next sort of big item, I think in here that I have heard, and speaking with a councillor last night, you know, we all, at the end of the month, we may have some extra money, and oftentimes that goes into our savings, and that for a rainy day and for different projects and for everything else. I think the reality is right now, we have suggested in this budget that we are going, and it's not for really a rainy day, it's for future capital. But right now we might be needing to, in this particular time for our taxpayers, dip into some of those reserves and not overly fund. There will be no savings at the end of the year. And I think that's probably a good way to look at it. We do know we have a 10-year capital project list of about $63 million. We need to look at that. We need to do a new asset management plan. We're going to have to make some hard decisions as to where that goes. But in a short term and a one-off year, we're not going to fix that overnight. And that is a longer term. And I said this also to some councillors yesterday. Our job, I think, remember, we're an elected council for 4 years. And then we have 4 years to sort of set this ship in this direction of this council and the Township of Muskoka Lakes in the right direction and leave it into the next people's hands appropriately. So those are some things that I think we're going to be working towards going forward with asset management plan. Our new strategic plan, we'll talk about that, and we can make some of those hard calls going forward appropriately. So right now we have about $3.5 million projected to go into reserves. Councillor Zabitz had said we shouldn't put any money into reserves. You know, that's a significant tax reduction at the end of the day versus last year. I want to throw out something and just try and get a general idea. My personal opinion is we should be still putting some money into reserves, not to the extent, obviously, but I would recommend that we would fund reserves to a $2 million level, which basically is taking roughly out $1.5 million out of our contributions to reserves. If we were to solely do that, we're talking about a negative. The only change we made to this entire operating budget was just to take $1 million out of the contribution to reserves. We are talking about a -7.5%, -8% tax rate increase going forward. So I'll just get anybody want to chime in on reducing that? I see Councillor Nishikawa's hand up, but personally, I would put a $2 million reserve funding level on the table. Councillor Nishikawa.
Thank you. I was going to be requesting that there would be a zero budget increase towards reserves. But I did want to establish a new fund of approximately $2 million for monies to be available for businesses and citizens that require assistance. And I don't know what that looks like at all. I don't think any of us does at this point, but I'm just suggesting that we put that money aside for whatever those needs that are going to happen in the next 6 or 12 months, that at least we're prepared to do something. Other municipalities are actually looking forward that I've observed, and I hope that we do the same. I think, again, I'm not interested in upping the reserves. It's not that I do not understand the accounting, but I am also looking at it really a 6-month period, that we can learn from that 6 months. at that time. So as I said, I hope others support the idea of creating a fund, a $2 million fund for those that require our assistance.
Okay, appreciate that. I think so. The question on the table for committee at this point to discuss, Councillor Nishikawa, is I put a reduction right now, and I think we can look at a second one, a reduction in reserve contributions by roughly 1.5 million to go to a $2 million contribution this year, which gets us to a negative budget increase. The second portion of that, I think, for Councillor Nishikawa is, do we want to contemplate her request is a $2 million fund for, I'm going to say, businesses within the area that we can support. I do know, and I can just educate council a little bit, in a discussion this week with our MPP Miller and our MP Mr. Aitchison, and I do know that FCM has also lobbied the provincial government and the federal government. There's a number of businesses that have holes that they don't have funding from those upper government levels. And if you've only been in business for 6 months, you don't have last year's prior financials. For many people who were experiencing flooding last year, the revenue numbers may be down, so that as a benchmark doesn't really work. So those upper people, and I know we've also had a conversation with our Chamber of Commerce to identify those business holes, and then to use our municipality as advocates to go to the provincial and federal government, because that's where the business funding really comes from. But I'll ask the question specifically in this to council, from a $2 million, are we interested in putting together a $2 million fund, as Councillor Nishikawa has suggested? And I'll ask that question right now. Councillor Kelly?
Thank you. Well, I mean, I certainly appreciate the sentiment, and I think, you know, we are all going to be challenged to help those in need over the next little while. I just don't frankly understand how we have any idea how to administer that, how to be fair with it, how to track it. I'm not saying we should pass the buck, but there are other social service agencies that do this professionally, if you will, that understand how to administer these kinds of programs. And I just don't think I'm looking at them right now on the screen. That's my concern.
Okay, anyone else want to chime in on that? Councillor Edwards.
Yes, thank you. I don't think I would put the $2 million fund in, but what I would do is, if anybody cannot get on any government programs, that we could do a tax deferral rather than just the 60 days, so that and almost like an interest-free loan, that they don't have to pay it and they can add it on later on. That way it would help them. But if they're getting any other type of government help, then they would have to pay their taxes.
Okay, I think Commissioner Stevens wanted to chime in a little bit on what's going on. Julie?
Thank you. So a couple things. A municipality cannot provide a tax deferral for a specific corporation or business. That is against the rules for bonusing. So that's not allowed. However, you can do generic deferrals, like I think this council has decided to do. So you can do that for everybody. So then the person makes the decision if they're deferring on their own behalf. The second thing I will say is that at district council on Monday, there was a discussion about helping businesses. And one of the things, and so further to one of the councillors said, the province and the feds are really coming to the table with a lot of money. And it's unclear where all that, you know, how it's going to be distributed, but it is certainly, I think it was 1 billion going to economic development, and futures programs were released last Friday. The specifics aren't out yet, but that I would stay tuned on that type of thing, because we'll get more information about it. So the one thing that council directed is that that district staff, so my group, will come back to the Finance and Corporate Services Committee with the consideration of what those programs look like, and whether the district or the area municipalities should come together with ideas for the people that are, or the companies that are falling through the gaps and what those gaps might look like. So I think it's a bit early to tell what that might look like. And I think just so you know, and I think Councillor Jaglett sort of mentioned this, is that you can deal with the budget right now. And if ideas like this, and so for example, one of the considerations, I think Town of Bracebridge has put aside $40,000, and council in the end wants to do something to the tune of $40,000. They can do that. You have reserves, and this is what those reserves are. That's the type of thing this is for. You don't need to amend your budget. You can just have a variance in the year, and it will become in this year, it would become a deficit, and we would deal with that in the next year. So I just want to give you some reassurance that you don't have to try and tie it all out right now, because there is a lot of stuff changing and moving every week with the province and the feds.
Okay, thank you for that, Julie. And I agree. The one thing that also, as it went around the district table, for those to understand, district is looking at it, but also in very close contact with each municipal chamber of commerce to understand what are the true business needs, what are the gaps in funding. And, you know, as I'm listening to our CAO over the last number of weeks in this, you know, business funding is not really, it's not at all in the mandate of a local municipality. What Bracebridge has done is they put $40,000 towards food banks and charity and those kind of things, which I understand and we could be doing. But as Commissioner Stevens has said, we can do that at a variance at a different point when a specific ask comes in, because we do have some reserves. So I'm not getting a lot of traction, unless I may, from a $2 million reserve from Councillor Nishikawa to help businesses at this point. I think there may be some other ideas going forward. I'll come back. Councillor Nishikawa, did you want to speak again? I see you leaning into the microphone.
Well, I pointed, but I was not actually, I didn't want this to become about a business discussion. I was actually relating to a number of residents that I have in my area that are affected. And again, if we were just going to relate it to business, I will tell you that most people that are in construction are not members of the Chamber of Commerce, and also are hurting in very, very different ways than I believe that is going to be coming forward. There's actually so far not been the avenues, but either way, I did not want that directed strictly to business was the conversation. And so I'll just let you direct it.
Okay, sorry. And I interpreted that it was, when we talked about that, it was supporting sort of a business perspective who may be down. I appreciate that it is citizen-based, and I think that's what we have unemployment insurance for. And I know that they are working on that specifically. Anyone else want to comment right now? Okay, so my question that I had posed earlier from a reduction perspective to send staff away was to look at a reduction in the contribution to reserves. We had $3.5 million. My suggestion on the table was to take that number to $2 million. Does anybody else want to comment on that? Councillor Jaglowitz.
Thank you, Your Worship. Before you consider that, I'd just like to point one thing out. If you reduce the contribution to reserves by 1.5 million, that means when you get to next year's budget, okay, you'll have to stay at that level or you'll have a tax increase. So if you're thinking this is a one-time reduction, it really isn't. It's times 10, because the only way you can get that contribution back up again is to raise it by the amount that you lowered it. And if you keep the contribution to reserves down by 1.5 million, that's 15 million over 10 years. And in order to do that, the staff would have to feed that into their numbers, and then you'd have to go and do $15 million worth of cuts to your 10-year capital forecast. Okay, and I don't believe that's fiscally responsible at all, not at all. And that's why I proposed that a one-time only, we take a surplus amount to bring it to zero. But going negative is just so bad. In fact, I don't even like going to zero, but do you understand? So I just want you to really think about that before. I certainly would not support it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Zavitz.
Interesting. So, you know, what I would advocate is perhaps having it, perhaps from 3.5 million, the reserves down to 1.5 to 1 3/4. I mean, I hear Councillor Jagowitz, and I ultimately respect his financial background. But again, you know, if we're not going to do something different and we're just going to do the same old and accept where we are, and I don't even think anybody knows where we are, you know, we might as well leave it at 3.4 million and I don't know, just cut our benefits by 34,000 and call it a day. So I'm not trying to be facetious. I think that we need to dig deep here. That's all I'm trying to say is I think we need to really look at ourselves, because we're being watched right now by everybody on that screen who is disenfranchised and who is suffering in the stock markets and in their jobs and everything else that Councillor Nishikawa is referring to. So I don't want to keep beating on that point, but it seems like we stray away from it and all of a sudden we're cutting 20,000 out here. You know, I haven't seen anything about, I don't know, again, sorry, through you, Chair, are you going to be referring to all the hundreds of thousands of dollars in the operating budget that
Yes.
We're going to look at? Okay, good, thank you.
I will be also addressing that. I'm going to go to Councillor Bridgman, Councillor Edwards, Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, Your Worship. As a couple of things, I can see a zero-based budget, so I would see reducing the reserves just to that level. And I think I would like to now respond to Councillor Zavitz's comments about things like the IT consultants, etc. Those, I'm assuming, and maybe the CAO can help me on this, those are for the programs that are coming in for our new budget program, that kind of an expenditure, which is absolutely necessary for us to understand where our business is. It would be, I believe in representing council and doing the best for this council. We have to have those tools. They're essential if you want to look at it that way. So I think that this budget has been brought down to the least that we can do to improve our business functioning and do the best for our constituents. So that's just my comment.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Edwards.
Yes, I think that under the circumstances, I could support a zero budget increase in that. I wouldn't go below that, and let staff figure out where they can shape it down. And that they've been working on this for months. They've done an excellent job bringing it forward, and I'm sure they can get it down to where it is. Again, I would not drop that bridge out of there though, and that because we have pushed it off for a couple of years now.
Okay.
But if staff can get it down to a zero or even like a 0.5%, and that increase, I would support it on those for this year.
Thank you, Councillor Kelly.
Okay, thank you. Again, I really haven't heard anything that has me convinced that the whole process of setting aside reserves isn't just arbitrary. If we can pull numbers out of thin air, 2 million or 1.5 million or nothing, there doesn't seem to be any clear rule set. I do have a ton of respect for Councillor Jagowitz's perspective on the whole world of finance, but to be very honest with you, I realize you're just punting the cost of something down the road. And frankly, that's perhaps a bit of what I'm advocating. This is not the time, and these are not the circumstances to be stepping up to the plate and spending any money. So my suggestion, and I don't know if this is going to win any votes or not, but my suggestion would be, let's pick a number that's somewhere between 0 and, is it 3.5 that's in the budget right now? Pick a number that's 1.5 or $2 million. Let's book it, and let's undertake to create a really sharp pencil look at what our capital expenditure budget looks like, what our whole capital, the whole infrastructure and the whole capital asset base of the township looks like. I kind of vaguely aware of what it consists of. Let's have a really hard look and make sure that it all has a place here and that it isn't, well, to find out, make sure that it has a place here before we start committing any kind of resources to it. And last response, and that was to Councillor Bridgman, I totally agree that there are things that are necessary. My point and my experience is, if we're working with a contract that was negotiated more than 35 days ago to have supplies delivered to us, we got room to renegotiate it because the lives have changed. People will cut to the quick to keep the business. And I know that's a really wormy little strategy, but it's also an effective one if you apply it diligently across everything that we do. That's it.
Thank you. I see Councillor Jagos wants to speak again. I just want to ask a question and see whether or not we can, because I'm not sure we're going to land the airplane, so to speak, at a contribution at 1 million or 1.5 or 2 million or what the number is in 0% increase or 2 or -5 at this particular point. And so what I'm hearing from everyone, and I'll just sort of get a nodding of heads, and what I think we have heard around the table is, number one, we've removed a couple of things: habitat, we've removed the doctor, we've removed our counselor pay increase at this particular time as a go forward. So the next area, and where Councillor Zavitz wants to look at from a department by department basis, and what I would suggest is that we could send over the next 7 days every department to come back and say, if council was to potentially cut something, what they may look at. We've heard about an IT or a consultant. That can come back to us in a report, just as we saw the habitat and the doctor today in an overall report as an initial blush. But they can put down department by department potential things that we could defer based on a staff recommendation, at which point what the levy would lower. Is it a 10 grand? Is it a 50 grand? Is it a whatever the item and the number is that we can debate a week from now? But I don't want to do that today, and I don't think we should be doing that today. Staff should come back, and obviously there would be service level implications associated with that. So if we don't do the IT, here's what we get, or we don't do the consultant, here's what we get, and here's what we don't get, and we can debate that a week from now, if I may. And then the third thing is the contribution to reserves. And it's really quite simple, I think, to say, are we going to put 3.5 million away? Are we going to put 2 million away? Are we going to put 1 million away? And we could show a bit of a gradation and variation of what those numbers look like as to what contribution to reserves. So we can look at both ends of the spectrum and then figure out what I would encourage council to do potentially, if that's acceptable to everybody, over the next 7 days, is to kind of talk to your people, talk to our residents, and find out what's an acceptable number. Is a zero-based increase appropriate? And then let's get to zero. Is a -5? Is a -10? If 20% of the world is unemployed, maybe the number should be 20%. But does that really affect us? Is our revenues down 20%? So those are the kinds of things that I think we really need to sort of understand going forward, that we come in with a number. Because again, I've seen spectrums here potentially from a 30% reduction in taxes to a 4.5% increase in taxes. And trying to get all 10 of us on the same page might be a little bit difficult, and we're going to have to parcel it out bit by bit. And I'm hoping that we all find an appropriate number. I know our CIO wants to have a quick conversation, so I'll look to him just to chime in right now.
Thanks, Your Worship. So I think it stands to reason that staff would be concerned about extensive cuts to reserves. I think it would be helpful for staff to get sort of a number. If you're wishing to go to a 0% increase, we're happy to come back with the numbers as it relates to that and provide council options. But we remain open to council's direction. Thank you.
If I can just ask a clarity question there, and I appreciate that cuts to reserves may be problematic. Are you saying zero cut or zeroing reserves or contributions, I think is significantly problematic, if I hear you, but a reduction at this particular point, again, knowing that we are, even on our 10-year capital forecast right now, we are $35 million underfunded going forward. We're going to have to deal with our reserves, and Julie's kind of turned on her video, so maybe she wants to chime in. I think the reality is we're going to have to look at our asset management plan. We're going to have to look at our contributions to reserve. We may have to look at borrowing money to fund these things. And I think that's a discussion for another day. I think the discussion on the table today, for me in particular, is how do we deal with our taxpayers and our ratepayers to make this as affordable a year as possible to them without totally damaging our future. Julie, did you want to comment?
Well, I think you've said what council needs to try and figure out. I guess if council was contemplating a full a reduction in the level of service into the future, for their 10-year capital plan, then perhaps you can reduce reserves today and it won't have a significant impact. I guess one of the things I wanted one of the councillors, and I'm sorry, I can't remember which one, you're not as familiar to me as the district ones are, talked about that it seems like reserves are not really based on anything. And I wanted to challenge that a little bit, because they really are. They are based on the fact that you've got assets in your corporation that need to be replaced over time. And right now we know, based on the rough estimate, that amortization, and so that's based on the useful life, those assets, it's about 3.2 million that is the amortization. That's just the historical cost. And that's when you think about sort of some of these assets are really long lived, 40 years, 50 years. When you go to replace that asset, amortization's not even going to hit it, right? It's not even close. It's 2 to 3 times. The replacement cost is usually 2 to 3 times what the actual amortization is. So when you go to look at what you need to be putting away for those replacements, that's what you need to have in your head, not the amortization. And when you think about a municipality, pretty much what we provide are those assets. Yeah, we have a lot of staff too, but the reality is the services are based on your bricks and mortar, the roads. And so, staff will be really hesitant to recommend a reduction in reserves because we don't believe that that's the right thing for you to do. We also can totally appreciate that this is a tough year. And so it will be a council driven decision. And so if you are coming to us and saying, whatever your recommendation is that you want us to look at, staff will come back and do a deep dive and look at what we can cut out of the operating budget. And we will also say that we could only get to this mark and the rest of it is going to have to come from reserves and we're going to have to live with that. That's the alternative. So we seek your direction on that one, and we'll come back.
Okay, so I've seen a number of hands up. I'll go to Councillor Jagowitz first of all.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I really appreciated Julie's comments. She's spot on, and I agree with her 100%. All I'd like to clarify is what zero is, okay? There's 2 kinds of zero. One is where our budget is a 0% increase, and the other is after the assessment growth, there's a 0% tax increase to the taxpayer. And I for one, would be heading towards, if we're contemplating zero, I would define it as a 0 tax increase, which might be a 1.42 or something increase, which equates. I wouldn't be, in other words, that's just to give direction to staff. Now, you may want to chime in on that if you have a different perspective. Thank you.
Julie, do you want to potentially explain the difference? And I think, the CAO and I have had numerous conversations on this in particular, and Julie's probably smiling because you've probably heard those conversations. And, if we talk about a 4% tax increase, ultimately, all of our taxes are going up 4%. The mill rate will change to get the extra money, but ultimately we're all somehow paying an extra 4%. We're not building a lot of new homes in Muskoka Lakes to increase our assessed value or assessment rate. So, maybe Julie, you can explain the two and how it really ends up to me, I look at it, if I've got a 4% tax increase, generally speaking, my personal taxes are going up 4% in Muskoka Lakes because we're not building new subdivisions and new homes and increasing our assessment base.
Thank you. So the assessment from year to year has sort of two main components. And so the first one is the phase in, right? So basically MPAC comes every 4 years and says that the value of a home is worth X, and then they phase that in, that assessment increase over a 4-year period. And so for Muskoka Lakes, that I think year to year was somewhere in the range of about 2.2% that it was increasing because of the values from 2016 that they were phasing in over a 4-year period. The other component is what I always refer to as growth. And actually, Muskoka Lakes actually usually has some pretty good growth because there is a lot of rebuilds. Maybe it's not new development, but it might be a demolition and rebuild of an old cottage into a newer one. And so you actually do have some fairly significant increases. So last year it was 1.4% or 1.42% in growth and assessment. And so those are the two components of your assessment. And what we basically take from a staff perspective, we take the total levy and we divide it by that weighted assessment, and that's what your tax rate comes out to be. And so what I showed, or what Derek and I showed in the treasurer's report, was what the tax increase might be felt by the average taxpayer. And really what that is the levy increase minus the growth in assessment that's related to new construction and increases from people changing their homes and that sort of thing, to come to the 3.1. So if you experienced an average increase in your assessment year to year, you would feel that a tax impact of about 3.1% based on the proposed budget. If you had no increase in your assessment year to year, so you were one of the fortunate few that their assessment just didn't increase, your increase year over year would be 0.91%, which so much smaller. And that's the tax rate increase year to year. Was that helpful or was it too detailed? It's a difficult concept, I know.
Councillor Jaguars, what was your question?
Yes, I'm sorry. I appreciate that explanation. I was going to chime in. I'm glad you did say that, because if we head for a 0% increase, we would only be doing that on those that really didn't have a tax increase. So people that their taxes are being phased in are going to have an increase anyway. And I'll tell you what I came up with, because I've had a lot of ratepayers talk to me, and they think when our budget goes up 4% or 5%, the whole tax bill will go up like that. And that's not what happens. So I've asked someone that I know to create a very simple program where a resident can put in their assessment this year and last year, and it'll calculate how much goes to the district, how much goes here, how much is the phase in, to give them an idea of what the impact is. And I'm hoping that could maybe be made available on our website so each ratepayer can see how that impacts them. Because I think, Julie, you've explained this before, that you can only talk about averages because each taxpayer may have a different situation. But what I was trying to get at was, we have to define what we mean by zero increase. And I was hoping that it would be, Julie, in your analogy, is it zero if you have no phase in, or is it zero if you have a phase in? So that would be my question.
I guess, Julie, if you want to answer that, I guess, Councillor Jagowitz, to my perspective, if we spent $1 last year and we spent $1 this year, that's a 0% increase in my opinion, and let assessment deal with it appropriately. But Julie?
So that would be a levy, a zero levy increase. That's how I would describe that. If you want a zero tax rate increase, that's a much different number.
Right.
We're at 0.91 right now.
A zero levy increase will result in a tax reduction for some taxpayers, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And I don't support that. So I was hoping the zero would be defined as a zero tax increase, which would be a slight levy increase.
So I think the flip side, if I may, Julie, in that comment, that some people would have a reduction in taxes at a zero rate increase or a tax levy increase. If some are going down, then others are actually going up. And those people whose assessment values have changed, they're actually paying more. So
That's the nature of the average, right? Is that there's some above and below the average, and yes.
Right. So, okay, I see Councillor Kelly's hand.
Just let me finish. But that increase on the phase-in has got nothing to do with our budget. That's because their assessment didn't go up in 2016 fully. It's just the phase-in. So you can't hang that on us, and that's what I'm trying to show. But
Okay, I'll go to Councillor Kelly.
Just a couple of pretty well housekeeping things. I don't know what next steps look like, but from my perspective, I'd be quite comfortable without the full-blown presentation and 2 or 3 kind of stress tests of different, you know, a pro forma, running a pro forma with different assumptions, for instance, for income. Just so we can have a look at what the impact, if we move this needle this way, if we move that needle that way. I'd like, because there's a lot of moving parts here, and I'd like to see how sensitive the outcome is to any one of them. I'm not trying to make work for anybody. In fact, I'm trying to do the opposite. The other question I have, and I know I honestly can't, I've asked it recently, but I can't remember the answer. When we are collecting taxes on behalf of the township, the district, and the education tax, and when there's a default, which I hate to go back to the doom and gloom, there will be tax defaults. Do we have like a pro rata share on that, or do we have to eat the loss, or how does that work out?
Julie, I think the question is to you, and we had this question come up last night that, you know, you guys send us a bill and the province sends us a bill. If someone doesn't pay that, do we still have to pay your bill and the town and the provincial bill?
Yeah, so usually it takes a bit of time before someone defaults. So what the district and education both did this year, which is different, is that we have both levels of government have deferred their payments. So what the district level did was said, you can send us a proportional share of whatever you've collected at the township, you can send to us. And the province just delayed theirs altogether for a period of time, and I can't remember what that is. So the municipality is actually doing okay from a cash flow perspective because of that. But the larger question was, what happens on defaults? And that one's an interesting one. So the defaults, when you write it off, the district and education, it gets offset from what's required. So the district eats that right off on their portion, and the township's only responsible for the township portion. The interesting part is, which as a municipal treasurer when I was at Muskoka Lakes, is you do keep all of the interest that's earned on all of those things that go. The interest earned on all of those non-payments stay in the Muskoka Lakes coffers. This year it's a little different because you've waived that. None of that interest earned goes to either the province or the district. So just keep that in mind. But I will say that, and the other part is that if you end up in the route of going a tax sale, this could be down into the future. What's recovered there, any beneficial part may stay in the township. It may not too. They've changed some of those rules, but there's the potential there as well from a tax sale. But that's, you know, that's way into the future, quite frankly. Yeah. But just so you know, that the write-offs are borne by each of the tiers of government.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. And let me just ask that question specifically, Julie. Are they borne, the write-offs borne when it is immediate default? So if I was due my taxes on August 28th and we didn't receive them, we have to pay you on September 28th. Do we credit those on September 28th, or does it take a year or two to credit those back and forth?
Yeah, so the way it is right now is that we have deferred whatever because defaults don't happen right away, right? Right now, like I just want to make sure, like when someone is saying, I cannot afford, I'm going bankrupt as a default definition, that's like 3 years down the road, quite frankly, because we have to hold on to it, and we keep sending and charging interest and all that jazz for a period of about 3 years, right? But right now, what we're saying is that if I can't afford to pay right now, And we're not, Muskoka Lakes isn't charging interest on that. You're only paying a proportion of what you receive in Muskoka Lakes. So you're no worse off. You're paying whatever anybody has chosen to pay. The district's taking their proportion of that. And you will, education's a little bit iffier. You may have to pay that, but I suspect that they'll come to the table with something different. They haven't said right now that they'll take proportional in the final bill, but it could come to that.
Okay, but I guess, Julie, all things, forget about the current tax rate where we are, where there's deferral of interest in, and all things in a normal year.
Yes.
If on August 20th, John Doe, who owes $10,000 a year in taxes, 2,000 are staying in the municipality, 4,000 are going to the district, 4,000 are going to the province for education.
Yep.
Do we as a municipality have to write the $4,000 check to you and
yes.
So we're going to have to be out that cash flow
in a normal year. Yes.
In a normal year.
Yeah.
So,
but you keep all the interest.
So, right. But we're not collecting interest. It's one thing. We may get that interest in 3 years when a tax sale, but that is going to be potentially, and let's assume, we collect annually. I forget what the number is. How much do we collect annually? Roughly $70 million, $80 million. In total that we're collecting on behalf of our residents. If that number goes down by, let's say, 10%, then there's $8 million exposure every year that we may have to be writing a short-term check on. I think that's what the councillor's question is going to be about.
We get to keep the interest, though.
I would suspect that that's not realistically going to happen.
Okay, so that's...
I would suspect that the lower tier municipalities in a two-tier relationship will not be responsible for those. I don't think, now obviously it'll be to district council's discussion, but I don't think it's reasonable in these times.
So, and I agree with you. And I think that's just sort of the question that we also may have to be lobbying the province that says for those people who are default in taxes for a year or 2 years, potentially, that we don't have to remit an education component of that today.
Does anybody remember what I said about renegotiating contracts?
So anyway, okay, I see Councillor Everett's hand is up, and then I'm going to try and land this airplane.
Good. What runway are you going to land it on? But that's another question.
The question's still open. I was going to go there, Alan.
I think what we should be showing the taxpayers is where their dollar goes. In other words, is it 52 cents of the dollar going to the district? Is it, and that 18 cents? Because if we go and we do not increase taxes, we might only be getting 17 cents of that dollar because other taxes are going up. So I'd like to see that shown so that people know exactly where their dollars are going. Thank you. And again, I think our staff have done a tremendous job, Julie and everyone else on that, and I will let them come up with the answers.
Okay, thank you. So what I've heard from everybody, and what I think we need to do, and is we need to send our staff back department by department right now and look at where they may be able to reduce costs, that we can do a plus or minus, and saying, yes, we agree that we should lose the consultant in IT and what the ramifications, and we can vote on that as an operational budget item at this particular time. We can talk about capital, and I think we need to have that as a separate discussion, but we also need to understand that even though we didn't do a capital project today, it doesn't affect what our taxpayers and our ratepayers pay today to help with COVID. So there's really no savings, and in actual fact, we may also be hindering today's economy by not doing some of those capital projects that are already in our capital reserve budget to do. So that'll be a point of discussion further for Thursday or next Friday. And I think the next thing that we should look at specifically and is overlaying we'll go department by department specifically from an operational budget. But then we may look at what a reduction in contribution to reserves of, I'm going to just pick, let's call it $500,000, $1 million, and $1.5 million, just to look, and we could go deeper if we need at that particular point. But we could evaluate what that means coming forward and what it means from the levy perspective long-term. Is that fair? Does anybody have any comments? Councillor Jagowit's hand is up. Frank?
Yes, yes, thank you. I just wanted to leave a closing thought from myself, and I did raise the issue of a wage freeze, which was not discussed. And this didn't come necessarily from me. Many industries have done that. They've chosen to have wage reductions. Some of our constituents have proposed it. So I just wonder if staff could look at whether or not there would be a possibility of a wage freeze for, say, a year or two or something. Because as I understand it, most of our people are going to be fully employed and a lot of people here aren't. And so I just like them to just give consideration. Now that may affect union contracts and all that stuff, but maybe just give that some thought. Thank you.
So absolutely. And I think I do know that some of our salaries are based on policy of council and where we go with that we've discussed in the past. So, but I certainly have our HR department bring that forward. And as they look at theirs, what could or couldn't be done. So, you know, I think the interesting thing, as much as we are municipal government, as we move forward here, we have twofold opportunities. We have an opportunity to help our constituents and our taxpayers moving forward in balancing their own books. But I will equally say we have an opportunity to equally help our staff and those people of which who we award contracts to in a business community here as we move forward. So every action has an equal and opposite reaction, so to speak. So it's a unique position that we're in, that we can hinder and help the economy, and hinder and help our staff, and hinder and help our residents who pay taxes to be able to balance their books going forward. So anything else? I think we have staff. I'll look at our CAO and Commissioner Stevens. Do you have some ideas where we need to go in each department head? Derek, do you want to comment?
So as I understand the direction from council, you want us to reduce the budget to zero. It's not clear to me if that's zero levy or zero tax increase, and look at potential further reductions, whether it be through reserves or further cuts on certain program areas.
Okay, if I may, I think the idea was every department right now would go through and look at how they could further reduce their budget. And I'm not sure whether that's you know, we've got a 4.5% overall right now, but let's look at reducing every department anywhere between 0 and, I don't want to say 10%, but that as a number. And then what a contribution to reserves, which in my opinion is an easy way to not put money into savings this year. I know it has a compounding problem later on, but everybody is using their savings to survive today. And I think we need to follow suit as a municipality and understanding, yes, if we short reserves by $1.5 million next year or over the next 10 years, we're going to have to replenish that contribution to reserves by $1.5 million. But this year in particular is a time that we need to look at that. So does that offer some clarity? I'm not sure that the 0% is a real number. Our Public Works Department operations was actually under. So, but what else could be done to defer from a staff? And we'll look to staffing department by department as to what you may potentially offer, and we'll see what the number ends up with. Is that a fair comment, Mr. CAO?
I think I would look for some direction from Mrs. Stevens if she thinks that's clear enough. I'm not sure in my mind that it is, but.
Julie, thanks for joining.
So my take is that we're going to come back to you with, I think I heard from one of the counselors, and maybe I'll just, it's what is necessary to maintain the basic services is so now so we'll take a look at sort of the extraneous things that could potentially be removed for a year. And I will caution you, it'll be painful the next year. So that's what I hear. It's a struggle, right? Because staff really did take a hard look at these numbers, so it is really tough. But I appreciate that we can look at other things to see. And I guess what we'll also look at is if you're willing to have a service cut altogether, then we'll look at those ones too.
Okay, Councillor Zavitz.
Thank you, through you. So things like cleaning up the geese poop at the parks for $12,000. I mean, in terms of clarity, I don't, this is a no-brainer, it seems, respectfully. I spent 20 minutes going through this is exactly what I said I would not do. But very, very clearly, we're sending a message to people that we are bolting this thing down. We are actually, hunkering in place, if you will. And that's what we're doing to the budget too. So, I want to, with great staff, everybody's working really hard at it, but I can send you a note right now that, and I'm sure we all could, in terms of painful, in terms of operating, I left the 2019 where it was, and this was just increases over 19 to 20, and it's $800,000 of things that I could easily. Now, personally, I know a bit, being here for 66 years, some of this stuff, there's no reason why we couldn't allay it till 2021. That's all I'm saying. 2021, we're wide open. I hope we're open in July, but if we do that, if we deal with this based on that premise, we could be in bad shape. Thank you.
Okay, point taken. And I see Councillor Nishikawa.
Well, I guess I'm sort of getting mixed signals. I had thought probably an hour into this meeting, there was a discussion that council would submit some kind of lists or some kind of recommendations to our CAO to give them better details than what this meeting is really allowing us to do.
I'll turn to the CAO. I didn't ever hear that we were going to send specific lists specifically. My understanding was we were going to send staff back to tell us what they recommend and then put a level of service. I mean, Councillor Zavitz has said he doesn't want the geese poop cleaned up and or whatever that may be, and we can go deeper on that. I mean, it's an item, and just I appreciate that. I've been always quite vocal that and we shouldn't be getting into the weeds, so to speak, on how to operate. What I think we need to respect is if we want a zero budget, then let council or staff come back and tell us how to get to a zero budget. Do we want a 5% reduction or a 10% reduction? And let staff come back and provide recommendations on how to do that. The question is going to come, how deep is deep? And that is going to be for this council to decide. Again, at one point, Councillor Zavitz, you said $0 going into reserves. That puts us at a minus 25% budget. Okay, so we go put zero. Again, do we want to do that? I'm hearing around the table that we don't want to go to zero reserves. So again, we're going to take that one off the table and we're going to look at other options, and maybe it's half of that. But I think what we need to really understand from a staff perspective, if the consultant in IT is removed, what does that mean and what we don't get? We can all look at numbers on a spreadsheet. I agree with the treasurer, or sorry, with Commissioner Stevens, that our staff have already gone down. I like Councillor Hayes's comment. This is a meat and potatoes with no gravy kind of budget. And but I do overlay and ask staff, how do we get to either a zero, or some people, I think, a negative. And I'll be honest, I might be one of those people who would like to try and find a way to get to a negative. I would do it out of reserves, but some may not. Derek, do you have some more clear? I think Julie knows from a department by department perspective. Do you want any more clarification from council at this particular point?
I think what I'm hearing is you want us to go back and look line by line, and we'll do that.
Okay. Councillor Kelly, you had your hand up, or has that been answered at this particular point?
No, just a real quick point. One of the things that occurred to me, since it's April the 20-something, is we've got 1 quarter on the books already in terms of our expense management. It might be useful for everybody to know how we're tracking at the end of the first quarter, year over year and year versus budget, to see, maybe we've already got some room built in because we're spending less. I don't know. Frank, you're laughing, so you're next.
Okay, so good point. And I think the other thing,
because we don't even know what we did last year. So
I think Councillor Jagowitz, that's a good point. And understand we are flying right now without a treasurer. We are asking our CIO to do double duty. We are asking the commissioner at the district, Commissioner Stevens, to help. And we're trying to put the best guess estimates we can together at this particular point. So we're going to be a little bit gray, if you will, going forward. Not just because our hair is getting that color, but we're going to come back, I think, a week from now, not seeing anything else, and try and understand what the cuts that we've talked about, and as staff would make some recommendation of cuts, and then also some potential reserve cuts as we go forward. Okay. And staff will also circulate, again, the questions and answers document in a cleaner format that we can send out to our constituents. We also have the other number of questions that have come in from the general public, and maybe there'll be some more questions that come in or comments from general public after today's meeting. And I'd suggest that it's Friday, maybe by Monday, or let's say by Tuesday, maybe we could get some of those answers out to our council and ahead of next Wednesday's based on comments on this, where we're at today. And then we'll look at a revised budget for next Friday with some understanding. I don't know that we'll see an actual different budget, but we'll see a presentation to council with implications of reduction in operating costs and service levels at that time. And then also what if we were to take out, again, X dollars out of reserves, what that may look like to an overall levy. And I am going to suggest, just as I did earlier, that council consider in your discussions with people what we can or can't do. And if you have a number in mind, is it a 0% increase? Do you think that's financially responsible? Is it a 5% decrease? Is it a 2% increase? What is that number that we all sit back and we can be comfortable with to let staff do their job and try and maintain a semblance of order in and around here as best we can? So I think that's our own homework to do over the next 7 days going into this. Are there any other questions or comments at this point, or everyone understands? Councillor Zavitz has his hand up.
Just for context, so I've already paid my property taxes, as many have. So we have one more payment in 2020. So I would imagine that what we're talking about here is really the impact of that. That's that second tranche, if you will, based on we haven't had disclosure, and perhaps we can't have that in a in a public forum, but how did we do? How are we doing as a corporation fiscally for 2020 to today? Can we know that?
Is your question about how much we've received out of our initial levy?
Sure. So the tax base, I mean, I saw a number that said the 2-month deferment will cost us $120,000, which was surprising to me. But it is what it is, I suppose. Where are we as a company? Did we receive 92% of the taxes that were due and payable on March 27th? Did we receive those? In terms of how was our financial condition?
Okay, we're just going to double check the number. I think we can talk about that. Julie's turned on, and I thank you for doing that, Julie, because I think our deferral in receipt theoretically at this particular point does not cost the Township of Muskoka Lakes anything, if I'm not mistaken, because we're not being charged penalties or anything, because we don't have to have the same remittance to the district and to the province. I think the original number would have been, if we had to make the payment, it would have cost us. But Julie, I'll turn it to you.
Well, you will, the township earns quite a bit on interest and penalties each year. And so you are waiving those for this period right now for a period of 60 days. So for example, like you make quite a bit. So it's 510,000 is what we've budgeted this year in penalties and interest. And so you're waiving, and I have no idea what portion of that's related to current payments or people that are habitually in arrears. So I don't know that answer, but so you are waiving a portion of that. But as far as the counselor was asking sort of where were your collections, and I'd want to get an up-to-date number, which I don't have, but at the time that the district went I asked each of the treasurers, and this was before the March payment was due, where municipalities were, and Muskoka Lakes was at 55% collection at that point, and it was about a week or two before the payment date. So 55% of what was due at that time had already been collected, but recognizing that there was a lot of people that paid on the payment date in Muskoka Lakes in particular. But we can definitely get an update of that particular number for next week.
Okay, thank you. I think, Julie, we've kind of got some general commission or confirmation on that we were actually ended up at about 83% of our perspective of what we anticipated. But we will confirm that for next week as well. The other thing, just as based on simple math, where the commissioner commented that if there's $500,000 in interest and payments, based on simple math, 2 months of that, assuming everybody was delinquent and there's no back taxes that we're not getting anything, so on and so forth, it's a cost of $41,000 amortized over 12 months. So, and that's assuming everybody, there was no back history and delinquent that's coming in from interest and penalties from a year ago or 6 months ago, so on and so forth. So any other comments or questions right now, or can we send staff off to do some work? I think we're in a position. I just want to, again, thank the Commissioner Stevens. Thank you, Julie, for all your help in getting us to the point today, and to our CAO, and also to all of our staff. We obviously have some more work to do, and this is nothing about the work that we have done. This is truly understanding unprecedented times in all of our lifetimes and trying to help each and every taxpayer manage their own books and pay their own bills going forward. To council, thank you again for very insightful questions and very diligent understanding of this year's budget moving forward. So with that, I have a resolution here moved by Councillor Hayes, seconded by Councillor Mazan. Be it resolved that the rules of procedure pursuant to Township Bylaw 2019-79 are no longer suspended. All those in favor? Hands up, hands up. Everybody is carried. Madam Clerk, you're good with that? I saw his. Yep, there we go. And then we are at 1:59. I have a final resolution moved by Councillor Nishikawa, seconded by Councillor Jagowitz. Be it resolved that this meeting adjourn at 1:59 p.m. and the next meeting of the Committee of the Whole will be held on May 1st, 2020 at 10 a.m. for the purpose of 2020 budget deliberations. All those in favor? Everybody, Councilor Nishikawa, everyone's hand is up. There we go. Everybody, thank you very much. Have a very safe weekend and look forward again. If there's specific comments you have, feel free to send them off to the clerk and to our CAO, who will pass them on. Thanks. Have a great weekend.